Today is Tuesday, February 7th, 2023. This is the Teaching and Learning Committee meeting of the School District of Waukesha Board of Education. Stacy, can you verify that the meeting's been properly posted?
Yes, it has.
Thank you. Our first item on the agenda is a request for approval of the Teaching and Learning minutes from the January 3rd, 2023 meeting.
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Zenobia. Any comments, questions, or revisions? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 5-0. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is an opportunity for citizens to speak. We have 7 speakers this evening. Each individual will be limited to 3 minutes. We will signal you at 2.5 minutes to begin to wrap up your comments. As always, we expect all speakers to honor our time limit, refrain from using any inappropriate language, and be respectful in their comments. Speakers who do not meet these expectations may be prohibited from speaking at future board or committee meetings. Speakers are here to address the board, not the audience. The school board and this committee does not endorse any comments made by members of the community here tonight. We would like to remind our community members of the impact of their words on others and that our children are watching. We commit to communicating with you in respectful and productive ways and ask that you do the same. We also expect that the audience will be respectful of the speaker and of the board and refrain from responding with verbal comments, cheering, applause, or other behavior that will detract from the meeting. Please note that no obstructions can be created between the board and the audience. Visual aids cannot be used, and the area behind the speaker and podium will be clear during public comment. Also, in order to respect our speakers and our meeting participants, please silence your cell phones. Our first speaker tonight is Renee Messerschmidt.
Evening. Tonight I would like to speak on Agenda Item K, Approval of Board Policy 9130.01, Complaints Concerning Educational Materials, Library Materials. As a mother of 3 sons, 2 who attend this district, I have concerns with the suggested policy changes. The current policy lists the procedures for the consideration process of removing materials, specifying it's an open forum where the public can make comments. However, under the suggested changes, this procedure is no longer required to be an open forum, meaning it doesn't need to be made public. Anyone opposed to the removal of materials from the library wouldn't be aware they're being removed. How can someone appeal to the removal of educational or library materials when it is not public knowledge? After the school board passed the resolution for parental rights and transparency, this suggested policy contradicts the resolution you voted into effect last month. If I'm the primary decision maker for my children's education and transparency for families is your new resolution, I want to know what educational and library materials are being removed and why. And if I disagree, I want the opportunity to appeal on what I feel is best for my kids. Another concern with the procedure for the consideration process no longer being part of the suggested policy and only listed informally in a library media handbook is if someone wanted to change the procedure, it could happen without voting at the public board meeting. By removing the procedure from the policy, you remove the transparency from the public. With the ability to make changes unannounced to the public, you, the board, and upper administration could hide what you're doing regarding educational and library materials in this district. Again, this contradicts the parental rights and transparency resolution you approved. What's most concerning is the ease for someone to censor materials based on bigoted beliefs under the guise of protecting children, thus removing materials geared towards marginalized students without the public being the wiser. A parent may censor their own child, but that is where the line needs to be drawn, with their own child. No one should limit my children or anyone else's kids simply because they disagree with the content of a book or the educational materials accessible for students' learning. That is for the individual parent to decide. If the board truly believes in transparency for families, as your resolution states, then I ask the board to reevaluate the agenda item.
30 seconds.
Put the procedure for the consideration process back into the policy and make it an open forum. On a parting note, I ask the committee one question. Who did you bring in to consult on the suggested policy? It certainly wasn't the American Library Association, who are the experts in the field, and you certainly didn't ask the community, who would never agree to the lack of transparency. So who did you ask for insight when none of you are the experts?
Does the speaker Next speaker is Mitzi Keetle, followed by Mark Blackman.
Thank you. I am speaking in opposition of the proposed changes to the policy on complaints concerning education materials and library. The current policy spells out procedures for a consideration process and requires an open forum for public notification, information, and input. The proposed changes delete a public forum. There is no language for public information, notification for the removal of the complaint, nor the resolution of the complaint. How would anyone appeal a decision to remove materials from the public when they don't even know that the situation is happening? Placing the consideration procedure solely in an informal handbook removes formal oversight and opens a path for changes not helpful to the collective. For a board committed to transparency, this does not make sense. Who really benefits? Our First Amendment right to freedom of expression encompasses intellectual freedom, the right to receive information from a variety of viewpoints. This allows people to become self-informed. Censorship occurs when someone objects to information materials and then access to that material is suppressed for everyone. Information literacy is fundamental to the mission of libraries, and it forms the foundation of intellectual freedom. The American Library Association affirms the rights of individuals to form their own opinions about resources. Schools, by teaching critical thinking, give students the skills to respond to the mountains of information they will meet in a lifetime. Later tonight, you'll be updated on the English language arts curriculum. Those literature standards are crucial. Grade 9, analyze how an author develops ideas. Grade 10, delineate and evaluate arguments. Grade 11, delineate and evaluate reasoning. Grade 12, analyze the impact of an author's choice
30
to
seconds.
develop the elements of a story or drama. Every person has the right to question library resources, but every person doesn't have the right to borrow those same resources from others because of their personal viewpoints, religion, values, or parenting. We are in a public institution.
Thank you. Mark Blackman, followed by Kimberly Redding.
I come before you to express my concern to the changes to the policy on complaints concerning educational materials and library materials. My first concern is that this policy completely removes the consideration process and the consideration committee completely out of the district policy into a handbook. By doing this, it removes a well-defined process that is open to the public and has been in place for over 35 years. Once a majority of this policy is put into the handbook, the whole consideration process can be changed by a superintendent or a designated administrator at any time without the input from the board, the community, or the library media specialist, because it is not in the policy. There would be no accountability to the board in the consideration process because it is in the handbook. It is, if the consideration process and committee gets moved over to the library handbook, the way it is presently written in the handbook, there would be no way for the community to express their views on the book being considered or removed. Also, since the committee discussion are not public, those on the committee could be more liable to political and internal pressure. The draft changes in the policy state that the formal complaint can be housed with the superintendent, yet the handbook procedure has nothing about a formal complaint process. In the present policy, the format complaint goes to the consideration committee, which starts the process, which is open to the public and where the public can speak to the committee. Also, the superintendent does not rule on the decision of the consideration committee, only reports to the public and the board. The key here is that the public knows through the superintendent of the decision. This allows any student, parent, staff, or citizens of the school district to know they can appeal the decision to the board. In conclusion, if these changes go forward in the way it is proposed, I can only speculate the school board and administration are internally seeking to limit public's input on the removal of library materials. Furthermore, it allows the book banners to operate in the district in an incognito way, removing library materials. Last year alone, according to the district website link document, Final Library Concerns,
30 seconds.
5 books were removed without allowing input from the public and possibly not following district policy. The public and taxpayers of this district need to know that the school libraries are meeting the state statutes referring to in the policy, that statute, which basically says that school libraries need to reflect the cultural diversity and pluralistic nature of the American society. What has been proposed limits the public's knowledge and opens up greater
Your time is up.
possibility of violating these statutes. I urge you not to accept.
Thank you, Mark. Kimberly Redding.
Good evening. I recognize some of you from being here in the past, and some of you are newer to the board. If you don't know me, I'm Kimberly Redding. I'm a mother of 3 sons who all made it through Waukesha School District, were supported by their teachers in times of family distress, and are leading more or less productive, more or less adult lives. I am also a member of First Congregational United Church of Christ. I work in the district, and I pay my taxes in Waukesha and have for more than 20 years. I am here to speak, as have others already, about Policy 9130.01, Item K. The proposed change to policies responding to complaints about library materials. As I know you know, the proposed change no longer requires that this be a public forum. This is anti-transparency, which has been one of the things that I have prided myself on as a Waukesha School District parent. That I know what's going on in the schools, that I can walk into the schools, and that I have free access to the curriculum and the materials my sons used. As has been said, it reduces accountability, so I don't need to follow up on that. A second part of the policy that I am opposed to moves the process from an official policy to a handbook. This, again, reduces accountability. Finally, I have to say I am discouraged that this school board has focused attention and through its actions amplified the activism of a minority. And I would be happy to talk with any of you about the funding of those minority views across the country. As an educator, I believe I'm charged with raising adults who will work in a diverse world with people who don't look like them, think like them, eat like them, or love like them. That's the world that I'm educating students for.
30 seconds.
That's the world that I expect my public school district to raise students for. As a parent, I know that my 3 sons, Morgan, Thomas, and William, to the extent that they've become successful adults, it is in part because this school district, Waukesha Public Schools, the great teachers we have here, the librarians we have here, offered materials that I do not have in my home.
I'm sorry, your time is up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Kristen Frederick, followed by Paul Reese.
Good evening. My name is Kristen, and I have lived in this community for 20 years and raised two sons who actually went through this school district, or one went through, one is still in. I grew up in a small town about 25 minutes away from here, just across the county line. Small school. We had a tiny school library, tiny public library. But I had the good fortune of having an aunt who was a librarian. Started out in the children's section, and she eventually worked her way up to the director of the public library system, the entire public library system of a large metropolitan city. She nurtured my love of books, and that nurturing of love of books led to a love of learning and education. And I had the benefit of that intellectual freedom that led me into a career. And my career has taken me 24 years into applying law and upholding the law. When I was 9 years old, the U.S. Supreme Court passed a case. It was called the Board of Education versus PICO. I won't give you the whole site. I believe I emailed some of you, so you should have the full site. But that case remains valid law, and it's relevant to this proceeding today. The Supreme Court recognized that the First Amendment protected the removal of books from school libraries. It protected students to have access to those books. Justice Brennan stated in that decision, local school boards may not remove books from school library shelves simply because they dislike the ideas contained in those books. Every child in this district should have the same access to nurture a love of books and reading and learning, and have that same intellectual freedom to go and become what they want to become. And they should have that access to the books. But that can't be accomplished in the school district if this board persists in gutting long-standing policies that provide for a procedure to protect those rights. The board's revision is an egregious assault on intellectual freedom. Members of this board have advocated for transparency and parental rights. This policy under 9130.01 is an antithesis. It's irreconcilable with parental rights and transparency. You are
30
stripping
seconds.
and jeopardizing constitutionally protected rights. Instituting a process that lacks transparency and which would not allow and possibly lead to the removal of books by parents who disapprove of ideas contained in the book is tantamount to thought control of an entire student population. And it's a violation of the First Amendment. The policies and process for reviewing book removals in our schools must safeguard the rights of all to have access to the ideas and the information contained in those
Your
books,
time is
despite
up.
being objectionable to some. We must
Thank you.
preserve the intellectual freedom.
Thank you. Paul Reese, followed by Dave Richmond.
Good evening. Where's Stacy Keene when you need her? I want to remind you what these books are about, because there are some books that have been removed from this school and what these parents are promoting tonight. It's talking about sucking guys off, eating girls out. This is what they're defending. These are the type of things that they're defending. This is what it is about. They want to sugarcoat it and ignore what is going on here. What these books have been about. They're about adults having sex with children and the promotion of that as being normal. This is the type of parents I get to send my kids to school with. You know, this is the sad state of affairs we are in. I don't have to bring that home. They can take their computers at home and they can turn off all the filters they want. They can do whatever they want to with their kids and treat them however they want. I want my kid raised in a way that they're not going to wind up in prison as some kind of sex offender, as some kind of child molester. That I want to protect my kid from. I don't have enough time to get in what I believe and how that turns out, but maybe tomorrow night. So, anyways, integrated math 1 I want to talk about. My daughter, I thought was going to fail this, and she passed, and it was a great relief. But I want to thank Mr. Hurley, or Mrs. Hurley, Mr. Hummer, and a tutor named Drake for helping her out so much. This was of great importance, and her mom and her dad for putting the heat to her and making sure she got her stuff done. Now, one thing the board doesn't recognize, and the administration doesn't recognize when it comes to kids coming into this district. My daughter came from a private school. So these words were new to us when we came here. Application, procedure, and communication portions of math. We never dealt with that. We didn't have formative, summative, and benchmark summative type tests. These were new to our vocabulary even, much less how is she going to catch on to this? Because these are new ways of doing math. So, yeah, she was set back, and we got help because we pushed for it. You know, there's a lot of kids that come into the district who move from other places or go from private school to public school in high school.
30
this isn't
seconds.
an uncommon procedure. But, so, since I'm running out of time, formative is 10% of your grade, the summative tests are 45, and the benchmark summative is 45, but homework is nothing. And that's something like for the next 2 weeks, everything she does is going to be nothing. And not that I'm saying it should be more than 5% or something, but it should be something. Because sometimes just having enough time to take a test and getting everything right at the last second,
Your
it just
time is
doesn't
up.
work. Some kids aren't good at that.
Thank you. Thank you. Dave Richmond.
Before my time starts, I would like to raise a
Your
concern.
time has started.
American with Disability Acts allows for accommodations for those with speech impediments and different things. I think this board needs to take a look at that and accommodations. And I brought this up in the past and it's been ignored along with everything else.
Mr. Richmond, I would be happy to have a conversation with you if you're asking for accommodations.
Thank you. I also would like to address, since someone can just get up and say the wrong things and not feel that he's needs to be justified or talked down to because you gave a long list of instructions, and I guess he doesn't have to follow them. I was going to talk about the different aspects for tonight's reading about the policies. But I keep coming back to remember always that the first and greatest concern must be for the educational welfare of the students attending the public schools. No board member shall, and then this is another one, conflict of interest, no board member shall use his or her position as a board member to obtain financial gain or anything of substantial value. I think there's some severe questions going on with that. But again, there's no one to take it to because everyone is involved. Another one of the policies that's talked about is maintain two-way communication with citizens of the community. Only if you agree with them will we have any sort of two-way communication. A big library review was done, and less than 20 books were done. Librarians were insulted repeatedly by members of the board and members of the community. It cost 40% of our qualified librarians from last year. The list conveniently did come from a John Birch Society group that is widely published. I don't think that's a coincidence that this ties in with some of the resolutions and things passed. I can go into great detail. I'm going to let the experts and some of the other people that have already spoken talking about policy and library. But if we're going to shut down open librarian and allowing
30 seconds.
open books and allowing for other people to come up and just say what they want without any facts and without any consequences, that's not good. And it should be an open forum to have these conversations about books. Just because you don't like them and you don't want them for your kids, that's your decision. You're not making the decision for other people's children. And it's your job as a board member to hear from all members, not just those that are writing you big checks at election time.
Your time is up.
Our final speaker is Erica Kochansky.
You want to go?
Excuse me, Mr. Richmond and Mr. Reese.
I am done listening.
Ms. Kochansky,
This line of crap.
that's it.
Unbelievable. Let that guy get up and move.
Hi, I'm Erica Kochansky. I'm the mother of an elementary school student here in the district. And I'm here to echo what many of the other speakers said about the policy up for consideration tonight. And I brought with me a copy of Fahrenheit 451, which I'm hoping everybody has read at some point. This was my parents' copy, and then mine, and it will be my daughter's soon. Not quite yet, though. I'd like to read a couple passages. Seeing that I've noticed some things happening, it seems like we're on kind of this slippery slope, and a couple of passages, they feel poignant and pertinent. If you don't want a house built, hide the nails in wood. If you don't want a man unhappy politically, don't give him two sides to a question to worry him. Give him one. Better yet, give him none. Let him forget there is such a thing as war. If the government is inefficient, top-heavy, and tax-mad, better it be all those than that people worry over it. Give the people contests they win by remembering the words to more popular songs, or the names of state capitals, or how much corn Iowa grew last year. Cram them full of non-combustible data. Chalk them so damn full of facts, they feel stuffed, but absolutely brilliant with information. Then they'll feel their thinking. They'll get a sense of motion without moving, and they'll be happy, because facts of that sort don't change. Give them any slippery stuff, like philosophy or sociology, to tie things up with. That way lies melancholy. And this is from kind of the villain of the book. We stand against the small tide of those who want to make everyone unhappy with conflicting theory and thought. We have our fingers in the dike. Hold steady. Don't let the torrent of melancholy and drear philosophy drown our world. We depend on you. I don't think you realize how important you are, we are, to our happy world as it stands now. So I'm hoping that you might
30
contemplate
seconds.
what that passage was about and where it seems like we're headed. I can't help but feel like we are headed in a pretty scary direction. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to all of our speakers tonight. The first item on the agenda for the committee tonight is an update on the Hadfield Achievement Gap reduction. And we have Mrs. Hart and Mr. Elliott here with us tonight. Welcome.
Is that our microphone?
That's great. Do you want me to put the presentation up or no? No? Yes?
So, hi, you two, welcome, thanks for being here.
Hi.
And just to let everybody know, so we really kind of rearranged this agenda for today because we have several guests in the audience, and so we wanted our guests to go first so they could go home. So thank you for being here first, and so that's how we arranged things. So as you also know, board members, we gave each of you, in fact, Brandy did the video on this, and so we propose that many of you have watched this. It's also posted publicly for the video to watch. So it's not necessarily that you have to go, Brandy, right, over the presentation, but certainly want to spotlight some things around the data, kind of reintroduce. I think we have a few board members that might not have been around even to know what the AGR is used for, so if you could go over that again, and then certainly questions from the board.
Of course.
Okay, so thank you.
Okay, so I'll go quick because I did talk about what the AGR was used for in the video. The AGR grant is a grant that supports schools as we're working on closing achievement gap. This grant has been around right after SAGE. So SAGE was a grant that allowed for small class sizes. AGR came about in 2015 that allowed for a little more creativity and some approved strategies other than just small class sizes. So the grant does require board notification. However, we notify you guys. We are are required to notify you twice a year on how the grant is being utilized, which strategy, as well as where we are in achievement data. Do you want me to go through? Kind of direct me, because I don't want to say the same things that I already said that you watched. I want to honor your time.
I do appreciate the great detail that you went into in the presentation, and I would just remind our community members too that all of the TNL materials are available to the public and can be accessed through the board docs agenda. So just in the interest of efficiency, we don't want to repeat everything here tonight. But one of the things that I always appreciate that we kind of talk through is the quadrant-based graph, where we really talk about how students can make progress, right? Progress and improvement is not going to be the same for every student. So maybe if we could just start there, and then talk a little bit about how collectively you're looking at metrics and numbers and setting those goals.
So on your screens, you'll see an example of the quadrant chart or the quadrant graph. And right now, this one is set for 50 percentile as the number. You can change that. So as we keep growing, we can make it higher as we look at both growth and achievement. So if you look at that, the pink box shows low growth and low achievement. So those are our kids that likely have an intervention plan, perhaps an IEP, at least a PST. That means groups are gathering around to figure out, like, how can we best educate this child? What do they need? What are they not getting? A child that is showing us in that green section is quite the opposite. They're high achievement, high growth. Those are kids that are showing us, like, you are learning at the correct rate. You are growing at the correct rate as well. If you look over to the orange section, that's a great celebration for us, because although they're still performing lower than the 50th percentile, that's showing us that they are growing higher. They are able to close the gap if they continue growing at the rate they are growing. Those kids next kind of go over into the green section, if you will. And then the most concerning square on your quadrant chart is that yellow one, the bottom right-hand corner. That is, showing us that child started to us quite high, and they're not keeping up. So that's a child that we do have to, meet as a team, whether it be teachers or coaches, and talk about what are we doing to boost them back up to the green by the time we take this data again, or take this assessment again.
Mrs. Kozlowski.
Thanks. This was, it was a great presentation, very encouraging. And I do agree with watching for Hadfield the growth. I think the growth has been really monumental to watch. So my question then for you is, as we start to watch, right, that comparison between growth and proficiency, how are we tracking them year over year to get really to that proficient? Because a lot of the stuff we look at, right, we're seeing great growth, but there's still that delta between proficiency. And so as they go first grade, second grade, third grade, what is the plan to kind of help with that?
I think we need to have a plan for that. Honestly, this is baseline year, right? We compiled everyone from both schools together, and I think we do need to figure out what that cohort data can look like. We do have students starting in with us at all times, and we don't exclude them from any of the numbers we ever show you. So as you looked through, you probably saw, a different number of group of kids at the beginning of the year than the middle of the year. It's going to be a totally different number at the end of the year, and we do, celebrate that. That's us. That's our building, and we're proud of that. But really looking at the cohort data as in, you stayed with us for the whole year, and now you've stayed with us for 2 whole years, we do need to develop a plan to how to show you that. We talked about that with Jody too beforehand. We don't have that right now.
But one thing I appreciated in your question is how you talked about over time. Because sometimes we think about education as a series of sprints, and it's really a marathon. And when you look at, when I look at what our kindergartners, first graders, even our 4K kids are doing right now, the base that they're building compared to what it used to be, I can tell you it's amazing. The letter development, we expect rigor. We expect that we don't lower our standards at all. And so what you see is baseline raw data with high standards that we expect. We're not going to dumb down, or I guess maybe that's the wrong word, but our teachers expect our children to do just as well as everybody else in Waukesha County.
As they should.
Yes.
And so just a couple things, right? I was watching at the letter sounds. What is it with the U and X?
Yeah, those are not letters we would use in Wheel of Fortune, so those are letters that come in later. No, I don't know, they're just not sticking, but they will. Give us a little time. They'll
Got
stick.
it. No, this was great. Thank you.
Anyone else? Mr. Zenobia?
In some of the data that you show, there's always, not in all grade levels, but in second and third for sure, there's, coming back in the winter, there's a decrease. And I guess I've heard in the past that a lot of that is attributed to, winter break and things. Is that what you see here? Not necessarily, or you don't?
Sometimes you can say that. There's so many variables. Honestly, like to look at true data is great to look at spring to spring or like the whole year. Sometimes you do see a dip in the winter. I think for math, I have that on my screen right now. There's a little bit of a dip. But as we continue to look at different data points, I don't know why. Maybe you have more to add on.
I've been doing maps for a really long time. And for some reason, there's always some type of dip in the winter. And we've always tried to figure out, and I've been in West Bend, West Allis here, same type of thing happens. And I don't know if it's coming off a break and like it's almost like final exams for our little guys, but there always tends to be some type of like midwinter oddness that happens. It could be too that, like I look at math, our students are, like what they're learning right now might not necessarily match exactly what's going on in maps right now, but it may it will at the end of the year. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of, so
Yeah.
Geometry is a huge focus in one grade. They might score really well on that part, but they might not score as well on number sense at this time or something like that. That can be a factor too.
Maybe it's a lack of sunlight.
Could be.
So we need more windows.
Well, yeah, there you go.
Skylights.
There was, and you mentioned this in the presentation, about I think it's slide 6, the reading running record data coming up in February.
Yep.
And I know that's not completed yet, but is there a chance maybe we could see that somehow, email, whatever,
Sure.
for our next May?
Do you want us to send it to Jody to distribute? Is
Yeah,
that fair?
however, whatever's easiest. Just would be curious to see that sooner than May. And then at the end of your presentation, you mentioned some additional funding that would go to hiring teachers and other things. Is there kind of a plan in place for that right now, or?
Yes, we're very excited.
We're very excited. We just got signed on the dotted line today, so.
Yes, yes. So the AGR funding allowed us to submit an appeal because we have more students, so we got extra funding that we weren't counting on. So we're using that for some extra teachers to come in, and we're targeting. So in the presentation, we had talked a little bit about the different tiers, right? Tier 1 is universal instruction, everyone gets it. Tier 2, I didn't really give you a lot of Tier 2 data. That's like your double dose. Your kids all got the Tier 1, now we're going to give them a little bit more where they need it. And then your Tier 3 is a kid that's really, really struggling, but ultimately they should get all 3 tiers to catch them up and close those gaps. Our new people are going to push into our grade levels of the highest concern, which would be 2nd and 3rd grade, and they're going to push in specifically for Tier 2, giving kids another dose of what they need to help, solidify those skills. So right now we're working on scheduling, we're working on coaching, a rollout plan to train the new staff members, a rollout plan to help coach the new staff members. So we are pretty excited to bring these people aboard, and we have a lot of year left, so we're ready to use it.
And they're very excited too, which makes us very excited. We had a pretty good number of people that applied for these jobs. They were very excited in the interviews. They came and toured our school. So they want to be a part of what we're doing, which made us excited. We were like high-fiving each other over the texting today. So I'm excited for our teachers and for our kids, especially.
Good. Thank you.
Mr. Moore?
Thank you, and I need to get in there and volunteer. I'll send you that email, Brandy.
We're waiting.
I know. But my question, Mr. Zenobia took it from me, but my other question is about the PLCs and the next action steps about the PLCs and PD. I saw that as well. What would that look like in terms of the professional development now going forward with the current data that we have?
So we're going to continue with professional development. Our building goal is writing. You guys saw a little bit of a sample of what writing looked like in one of the lower grade levels. So we will continue focusing on professional development with writing. That is our building goal. That is all of the elementary focus of this school year for learning. But we're also going to be adding in some pretty focused team time. Like, we still need to nurture our new team, right? We're bringing on new people. We have people that are still, developing the team with their own team, whether it be regular ed plus special ed. We just want our people to, love what they're doing. So we are going to continue supporting them and PD, which is Tuesday mornings before school. We meet every single Tuesday. And then for PLCs, it's going to be more what that team, what that grade level needs.
So one thing we've done to help answer your question on that is we have dedicated planning time with second grade, third grade, with coaches and these new people as well, so that they're looking at the data. And just for example, our second grade teachers meet every Friday afternoon. They plan the following week together. So our new people will join that group, and so that they will be targeted, focused, moving forward, so that it's intentional. It's not just we're adding more people and good luck.
Yeah.
It's going to be very intentional, and
I think their rollout too will be really important in who they're working with, why, and what they're doing, right? And then to follow back up, like, how's it going? Let's look at the data. Let's see if what we're doing is impacting kids. So I think that whole thing in their rollout plan, like when they start with us, is super important.
because what we're seeing with some of these students that are maybe not making as much growth or are on the lower end is they're starting to learn words in isolation. They're starting to get the phonics part of it down pretty well, short vowels. I'm speaking of some of our second graders. I watch them, they can do the short vowel stuff, they can do the phonics stuff really well. They go over to the book and they take a running record. They can read the whole word, they can read the words. But then even to look back at a question like, how did the family get to the school activity? And there'll be a picture of the family in a car. And they will have read the whole story, but now they got to get all the words and now understand the story part of it. So that's right where they're at. But the good part is they can attack the words, because they were struggling with that prior to that. So now we're going to get our kids even in the books even more. And so taking what they've learned in the phonics part of it and applying it to reading and have it all kind of make sense when all that's going on in their head. So that's kind of where we're at, and that's what I see a lot of in our small group, and then I see it in our whole group work as well.
Mr. Como?
You went through the majority of your action steps, and the very last one I wanted to kind of get a feel for what that looks like. Focus on minutes, learning spaces, and targeted skills for students in second and third grade. Can you paint the picture for me there?
100%. So we have talked about there are students that learn great in the classroom. There are students that learn better pulled outside of the classroom. So we've talked about, whether that's a regular ed student that's getting some intervention, or that's a special education student that should be pulled away from other distractions. So we are talking about that quite frequently, so that students are learning in the environment that is best for them. And that is an ongoing decision on where and why, and so that is on there because it is something that we've talked a lot about with both our regular ed and special ed staff, to make sure students are getting exactly what they need, not what everybody else needs.
So one example is we have a group of kids who, if you were to pull them out, it would be 5 minutes to get to the room, 10 minutes of learning, 5 minutes to get back. Now I see them in the classroom, and we got as many kidney-shaped tables as we can. Our teachers have rearranged it. They're over in the corner. They're participating in writing. They're learning sounds. They're learning right there. And it takes them 30 seconds to get from their spot to the other spot versus, and they're part of the classroom, but for some students, they need that. For a few students, they do need that pull-out setting. But, so we look, like to just look at a group of kids and say, I'm gonna pull that whole group. That could be very distracting, because there's a lot to see in the hallway, down the steps into the room.
So the reason that's there is because we do want to make every single minute matter. I mean, the school day can, you know, like he just said, with transition time, we don't want to waste 10 minutes if we don't have to. If we can instruct them right in the classroom, let's push that teacher right in and have it happen.
And that's why we're so intentional about schedules. Randy was super intentional, I'll just give her all the credit for that right now. Super intentional about the scheduling, so that teachers had time together. So that if your kids were going to art, your kids were going to music, and your kids were going to Phi-Ed, you all have it at the same time so you can meet. So we're very intentional about that. So when we built these new schedules, we were also very intentional with the new people as well.
Could you also comment on parent interaction and how, I'm sure some, that could be very intimate. There could be like a lot of communication with some parents, and then there may be other parents where there's not as much. And can you kind of talk to the variability on that, and more specifically to the AGR
Sure.
students?
Want to go? You want
So,
me?
well, you can start, go ahead.
So we use an app that we try to attract most parents on. It's called Class Dojo. We send all kinds of reminders, photos, videos, all the fun and learning that happens in our school day. And that is the first kind of thing that parents see every single day of all the awesome stuff that's happening in the walls at Hadfield. Outside of that, I mean, we have the same types of events that the rest of the schools are planning with their PTO or their family engagement groups. We work close with WISPE, so we are providing parent education right now. Today's our last day. We have Love and Logic happening over at Hadfield right now. There are different levels of support for parents, and we're trying to listen to parents. Like, what do you actually want? What do you want us to bring to you, and what do you need? Outside of that, when a child is struggling, and we do need to develop a plan for them, we follow district procedure, which is to schedule a problem-solving team, or a PST, where we all gather together, everyone who works with that child, the coach, the teacher, anyone on that grade level, and we gather together and we figure out, okay, what does this child need? What should we do better? What should we do less of, more of? What do you think, parents? Parents are involved in all of that too, and those are the students that we're seeing a great deal of success with. The strategic, purposeful plans that parents are also included on, those are the ones that we're seeing the highest level of growth.
And one thing that we really stress is when we have those problem-solving team meetings, that should not be a surprise for the parent. So they should know prior to coming to that. And one thing that came out of the last 2 or 3 years that was positive was the technology of being able to connect with parents. So they don't have to physically come into our building. We will call them, WebEx them, FaceTime them, whatever we need to do to make sure that they're part of those meetings, because it's super important that they are.
Mm-hmm. And most of the times, I mean, parents can request that too if they think, well, I want more, right? Like, it doesn't have to be the school that's requesting that. But one great thing is that most all of our parents that are involved in that for the development of their student, whether it be social, emotional, behavior, academic, any kind of development that we're working on together, they're always wanting to know what they can do at home to support. And that, to me, speaks highly of our school and our community and what we're building, because we are in it together, and it's not easy work, but nobody's running away. Like, we're all in it together. So I just think that speaks highly of our school and our community and everything we're trying to develop.
That's really good to hear, that team approach, that how can we all, we know that we all have responsibilities for our children in our community, and it's exciting to hear that there is that want, there is that desire, there is that love to move them forward, because, you just, I don't know, you hear so much negative on the news, so on and so forth, that sometimes you just sort of like, oh, does that permeate throughout our entire community? And it doesn't necessarily permeate throughout our entire community. So good to hear that.
Yeah.
I have a couple, I think they're easy questions. Well, one, maybe observation, and I'm not sure if you track this at all with the winter map test, like the time to complete the test. Is that, okay, and is that something that changes, or don't know?
I looked at that report for some of our kids, and some of them went rather fast, to be honest with you. There is a new tool on it in the last few years that will let you know when a kid is going too fast, but if they go just over that limit, like one of our students took 13 and a half minutes to complete a 40-some question math test. Well,
that's going to make a difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So some kids do get click happy, we call it.
Teachers did a really great job, though, when the sloth appeared. That's the like, hey, slow down warning. Teachers did a really good job of like taking a minute, take a breath. You're going a little fast. Like, I'm going to put in the code, but no more rapid guessing. And so once a kid knows, like, oh, my teacher knows I did that, they usually slow down. So it's just hopeful to talk to them about the second when we get back into spring. Like, no sloths, guys, no sloths. So they did a really good job of having that learning conversation as they were going.
I think that would be really interesting data. I don't know how useful it would be, to be honest, but I think it would be very interesting just to understand if there are patterns, seasonal patterns, coming out of holidays or coming out of summer, if that kind of changes the engagement in the exam itself. The other thing that really just kind of stuck out to me, I know we're always kind of focused on these end-of-year goals and how many kids are above the 50th percentile, but a couple things that I noticed I think are really positive was, and this is where Jen Getterman's really the expert here, but that mapping year to year, right? We're looking at first grade this year, first grade next year, first grade, but it's really first, second, third. So if I look at where your first graders are this year and where your kindergartners were last year, that's a huge improvement. And that shows that the resources and the engagement, the strategies are working. The other thing that I noted, and I know we talked a lot about some of the challenges around second and third grade and where those kids were at in 2020 and, how that really kind of challenged the start. But the test scores, the MAP test scores seem to hold. And if I remember correctly, second grade is when they move from having to read the test themselves. And so the scores typically go down a little bit. So, I'm not necessarily saying that we stop and celebrate the 33% because that means that these kids move to a more challenging test and held where they were before. And so I think in many ways, if we can just kind of find those threads year to year, what I'm seeing is a lot of really good progress at a lot of different levels. So it looks really good.
Thank you.
Kudos to you guys.
Teachers are working hard. So are the kids.
Yeah, they are. And so are you too. Yeah.
We're doing all right.
Any other questions or comments? All right. Appreciate all your time and effort.
Yeah, thank you.
Of course.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks. Yeah, stick around.
You probably stick around, right, for the
Yeah.
Bridges conversation.
We're excited about this too.
Yeah,
Or at least I am.
Welcome back.
So
All
they,
right.
they are going to stay in the periphery. So the next agenda item is the update on the Math Bridges pilot at Hadfield. So we kind of put them back to back for obvious reasons. And just to remind you, as Rose pulls up kind of the highlights of her presentation, thank you both for giving that video to us. When the merger happened, we knew and we heard loud and clear from teachers that they were sort of done with, again, creating their own version of a math curriculum that was rigorous and standards-based. And so even though the district was 1 year away from conducting the formal curricular design process, we did go ahead with allowing Hadfield, through their request, to use Bridges in the first-year pilot. So you have to know that, remember that Melissa Yao is taking a team through a pilot currently for all of our elementary schools. Bridges is one of the final two that they are looking at. So just keep that in mind in the context of the update today with Hadfield, that you'll still be getting the pilot updates on both of these resources in upcoming meetings. So hi, Rose, thank you.
Hello.
Welcome.
I'm excited to be back here to share the excitement that we have for Hadfield and the students that are working with Bridges and the teachers. Again, you saw the presentation. Just a few things that I wanted to highlight quickly for you is you saw the timeline and the plan, but this is when we talk about data piece of it. This is exciting for me to look at when I'm looking at this, because you can see that in the fall, we did a beginning of the year assessment for all students. And so that's measuring what they should know by, in this grade level. And you can see that when we took it, Bridges breaks it down by roughly 25 percentiles. So 25% of our kids would be in intensive, 25% in that strategic, 25 in that approaching, 25 in meeting. And you can see at the beginning of the year, we're almost up to 80% of our kids in that intensive, which means they got 25% correct. So they had 75% of it incorrect. So they were considered intensive. The strategic is that 50 percentile. And so you can see at the beginning of the year, the students definitely struggled with that beginning of the year assessment. As part of the plan to evaluate Bridges at Hadfield, the teachers then gave a number corner assessment, which is some of the same questions as that beginning of the year. Not exactly the same, but the same standards, the same, we matched the standards up. And so they gave it again just in January. And you can see that's our blue data. And so now we are looking at how, a little bit more than 20% of our students in that intensive category. And you can see how our meeting is now our highest category. So we have those students who are already starting to meet our end of year expectations. At the end of the year, we will give one more assessment, and it'll be the comprehensive growth again, which will be the exact same as we gave at the beginning of the year, and we'll do it again at the end of the year. So we're hoping everything will just continue to flip-flop along the way. So I think that's important. Our students are doing well with it. The other thing that you saw in there that you just, quick highlight is the survey results. This is the same survey we're giving all of our teachers who are piloting Bridges and iReady. And so we have Hadfield teacher information, as well as we'll get our students or teachers across the district information to bring back to you in the months that come. But just picked out a few of the questions to highlight, is it designed that teachers spend sufficient time, that students have the time to apply math. And you can see that all of the teachers who responded said Bridges fully meets that. And so you can see the different questions that I highlighted along the way. And then the other part I included for you to see was just teacher comments and how they have seen the program work, how they've seen their kids react to the program. And then, of course, I had to include the challenges, because there are some challenges and we wanted you to be aware of those as well. But I really feel like we're working through those. The coaches, Angela and Michelle Tranquita that are there, are meeting. We meet with the teachers once a month for 2 Thursdays in the morning, and we preview what's coming up, what's the next unit you're going through. And so trying to give the teachers a way to learn about the content and be prepared for that next unit. And I think we're all just getting into, the teachers are knowing, okay, I need to read this 2 times before I can start to be able to understand it, not understand it, but to know how it's going to flow in a classroom so I can present it to my students. So those are the highlights of where we're at with Bridges. Again, it's been a really successful process up to this point. The teachers are really getting to know the program, and they're really seeing the progress that kids are making. And the progress that kids make, of course, is exciting our teachers to dig in even more.
All right, Mrs. Kozlowski has a question.
Great, thanks. Again, this is exciting to see. The amount of improvement over such a short amount of time is significant. In one of the questions that I have, just going back to your survey, I think it's really important for the board to understand when we're putting in structured curriculum that is consistent across classes, consistent across schools, how is the staff doing? And the one survey result was really interesting was for those that speak dual languages.
Has
that changed? Are we seeing for the curriculum for them to be able to be impactful?
I think the big part, when I look at this question that's in the survey, is does it provide supports for those students? One of the things that you will find in Bridges, they do have, as with many manuals, they have it written in here, here's the supports you can do for your students who may not speak English. And so they are there. It's just that I think at this point, when we look at the ELLs at Hadfield, there are not as many, if I'm correct.
I think we have 10.
10 students overall. And so this also may be that they haven't really dug in as much because of of who's in their classroom.
But we're not seeing those students lag, right? So if I look at, right, I should see the exact same type of thing.
Yes, you should see the same.
I think what'll be important is what the other teachers that are piloting it, that maybe are in a dual language school, how they answer that question. That'll be very important, because like our teachers, we don't really have currently a need for that right now, but I could see other schools have a huge need for that.
Yeah. It's one of the things that I think is really important, just to understand, from the execution side, how is it going?
Yeah.
I mean, the results are very telling and impressive.
I was going to say that it's going well.
Yeah, good.
Mr. Moore.
Well, I use Bridges as a teacher, so I'm a little bit biased, and I had an awesome time with it. So I do look forward to being used here. And one of the things that I got from the presentation, but also my experience using Bridges as a teacher, was the fact that it gave students the, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that was my experience, and pretty sure it's your experience at Hatfield, that it gave students the multiple avenues to get to mathematical answers, but they also have the opportunities to collaborate in groups to do those math.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And they also learn to collaborate. So, it brings, I remember, when students are using Bridges, from my experience, they can be in a group and they'll go to the board and all solve it different ways to show how they got to that mathematical problem. And it also teaches them communication and fundamental skills with the mathematical equations that Bridges use. So, but, I used it, I had a great experience, and hopefully you all are too, so.
Yeah, definitely.
Anyone else? All right, well, it looks like it's having an impact. I appreciate the time and effort that you all have put into exploring it, and look
Everyone
forward
come
to
and see kindergartners solve unbelievable problems.
Me
just
too.
swing by. Yeah, it's amazing.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
I was going to say, they have tons that are so exciting to see. And the kids are loving the workstations and playing games, but they're learning and they aren't even realizing it because they're having fun.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.
It's the best way. Thank you so much. Have a good night.
Thanks.
You got it.
All right, on to another exciting topic.
All right, so we have, last month we were kind of spotlighting our K-12 art, and this month we're going to spotlight our wonderful music program, K-12. I know Jared, and hi Jennifer, Joey. Jared is not here this evening. He's having surgery tomorrow, so we gave him the night off, right? That was nice
So
of
you
us
just
to
get
do.
me, but I will not sing because I only have a voice that 4K students.
Yeah, like where I told her, I'm like, bring an instrument, Yao, you gotta play. So Joey and Jennifer, thanks for being here, all three of you.
Good evening.
Wonderful. So again, just so much to celebrate in our music programs across the district. So I'll just let them say what's wonderful, because a lot is, and I'm sure the board will have some questions too about programming. So thank you all for being here tonight. It's good to see you.
Would you like us to go a brief overview, or do you just want to go into questions?
To get us started, you don't have to go back through the whole presentation. I really appreciate the time that you put into that. My favorite part of the presentation that you gave was the very, very long list of all of the things that our music students are doing over the course of the next month or two. And I know that's not even all of it. What I had kind of asked Mrs. Landish about too, where can the community find that list? Can they find that list? Because I think we should make that really open to the public. How do we celebrate that?
Great that we could put on the district website even.
Splash page, right?
Page, yeah. Here's what's upcoming.
Yeah. I mean, yes, we could do that, but she was asking, she's like, this is awesome. She's like, how can we have
I'm
everybody
like filling in my
know that this is
calendar,
going
trying to
on,
figure out how
right?
I can get to everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't currently publish this, the comprehensive list, but each school, for their own events, publishes through their own school sites. But it is something that we can definitely put on our district website.
There's a lot going on, so I appreciate that. And then maybe related to this, and I appreciate that we got some of the, the hard data in addition to, we know that we have high quality programs because we see the output of that. Just maybe from your perspective, what you're feeling in terms of the engagement in the music programs, students' access to some of the electives, and totally transparently, I think we hear anecdotally from students that I want to take band or I want to take this and I can't because I've got these other classes, or any thoughts about just that level of engagement and how well we're doing with getting kids into the things that they want to be in?
I mean, I think you said exactly, anecdotally, you hear that, we have kids all the time. By high school, they have much more flexibility, but, middle school especially, schedule is the number one reason that they, that they can't take all of the classes they want, and scheduling, but also what the requirements as well. It just definitely means that they have to pick and choose, and sometimes different things, take precedence for them, I guess.
I would say that happens at the high school too, just as much at the middle school. I mean, because I can think of examples where students, they're taking honors classes or AP that they need to get in there and they can't fit in choir or band or orchestra, or they are doing at I'm sure at all the schools, they can leave and do like a work study. And what is it called? They have a release, and they can do like a college course at Carroll, let's say, because I have students, and then they can't, the schedule doesn't work for them to get back in time or something. So that happens frequently enough, I would say.
Do we have pathways for students, especially high school students, to engage in the music program without having it on their transcript? Or having it as they can audit?
Yeah.
I don't want to monopolize. Other questions do you guys have? Mr. Como?
So it's been a little bit since my children have graduated. One was 2010 and 2013, and they were both involved, one in orchestra, and one was in band, and so a clarinetist and a violinist, and what was amazing is my wife and I, we have like no musical talent at all, and so the public schools really introduced them to these instruments, and they carried with them through the school, and they play it periodically. They're not completely into it as much as they used to be, but I can't imagine how difficult COVID was for these students learning what they're trying to learn. And I'm sure there's probably no one happier than you and your colleagues that we're back to face-to-face. And I just was wondering if you could maybe give us a sense of how you're bouncing back from that, and were there some changes that maybe you made now because of that? Just kind of give us a little bit of an assessment of where we are now, kind of going through that tough time.
Thank you very much for bringing that up and acknowledging that was a definite issue that we dealt with in the performance-based classrooms like band, choir, and orchestra. I have, I don't know if they're fond memories of trying to teach 60 kids on my screen, and I'm playing piano and we're trying to learn a song together, and it's just not the same, right? But I think, we've gotten back into that, quote unquote normal world, because from, March of 2020 until a good amount of time after that, it was not really what those students signed up for, and they stuck with it because we had great back and forth relationships with them, and they persevered and stuck with it. But now that we're back, I think we're seeing the numbers and the interest wanting to rebound, and we're trying to take trips again, and we're trying to do collaborations with other schools and other things that 2019, 2018, and before was just part of our being, so.
That's kind of what attracted kids too, to
right.
taking the courses and participating in the extracurriculars.
Of course, so.
And some students didn't continue. There are a fair amount of kids at the middle level now that I have in 8th grade that weren't singing during COVID because they weren't singing in school.
Right.
So it still comes up too. I mean, just today, one of your students who's going to be a senior next year mentioned COVID and how the first year as a freshman, they came in and all the chairs were spread out, way spread out, and it was like a weird feeling. That was their freshman year of high school. So it was significant, and they still talk about it just today, ironically. And they're so excited to be in chamber, which is the top choir. And so that's been their dream since middle school, but that was a huge hit for sure. And so I think too, what we're all trying to do is get back into the swing of all the different performances. I mean, still last year, one of the events, Luther, the Dorian Festival was canceled because of their situation. So we didn't get to go, so we went this year, and so we're trying to give them all the opportunities that have been missed for a few years.
Just to piggyback really quick on that, so I'm at Les Paul all morning, and then I go to West all afternoon, and like my 8th, 9th, and 10th graders, I'm just trying to put myself in their shoes, like their opinion of what choir is, or band, or orchestra is so skewed, because they didn't have that normal 6, 7, 8 experience, so it's going to take another 18 months, 2 years to kind of almost just feel completely back, if that makes sense,
Sure.
But thanks for asking that.
Yeah, and I don't think we can expect just to snap our fingers and go back to normal kind of thing, especially if you have, students who haven't experienced something before. And you can't just because we know what it should be, doesn't mean that that's just going to translate over to them. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate your dedication, to, comeback is the right word, but really putting the nose to the grindstone, trying to figure out what's going to be best for the kids to get back to where, you want and can be prior to COVID. So thank you for all your hard work on that.
Yes. Mr. Zenobia.
I had noticed in the numbers you provided on participation at the high school level, maybe has dropped off in the past year, and what I hear is that's really the reasoning, that the 8th, 9th, 10th grade kids that didn't have that middle school experience, is that kind of what you're seeing in these numbers?
I think it's a strong possibility. It factors into that equation.
Okay. Well, like Mr. Como, I'm not musically inclined either, so.
It's never too late to start.
I don't know about that, but looking at all this and all the opportunities there are, I wasn't even aware of all the opportunities that there are and all the participation that you currently have, and it's wonderful. Doing a great job, and it's a very vital part of learning for those that can participate. So that's all I had.
I'll follow up on that because I love looking at the numbers, but it's hard to infer a trend with 2 years worth of data. But I would think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would think that our 8th grade engagement would in some ways predict those kids that are going to stick with it in high school. And just looking at last school year versus this school year, the increase in the 7th and 8th grade participation in the different music options is pretty significant, like more than 50% what it was the previous year. So that would suggest that I think we're going in the right direction.
Yeah, it does. And I'm only taking this one because typically our teachers don't see those those section reports that you looked at, but we do look at those very carefully. And so yes, the numbers looking at our 7th to 8th grade from year to year are increasing, and we do share that with our teachers, those generalizations of those numbers, and they obviously notice it in their classes. But there's a lot to celebrate, and when this department comes together to talk about how they're creating that experience, again, they spoke about how it was so different during COVID. I can't speak to the level of professionalism and care that they put into creating that and making it just such a valuable time for students. That definitely contributes to the increase that we're seeing. And in some cases, we've nearly doubled the number from 7th to 8th from last year to this year, which is a huge celebration for this team.
I think, I appreciate you all being here. I was the one who asked to bring the art and the music programs forward. It's so incredibly complementary to everything else that we do. And my engineering nerd is remembering that Pythagoras was the guy who said that music was inherent to understanding ultimately trigonometry and all of the aspects of math and science and literacy and really social understanding. And so from my perspective, that support, I think we have to strive as a district to always provide the support to have those complementary programs, music and art in particular, because that's what rounds out our students as whole individuals. And so I appreciate all that you all have done. I think this comeback from COVID is, it's going in a positive direction. So anybody else? Thank you all for being here. Thank you.
Thanks for inviting us.
All right, a little recorder concert for Mr. Zenobia and Mr. Cuomo after.
I think we'll look at that. Oh, yeah.
But I enjoyed watching my friends and,
Maybe we'll do that at our next board meeting instead of the drum line. Yeah.
There we go.
All right. All right, moving into our subject areas, specifically literacy tonight. We're going to talk about the Study Sync update. So we have Tiara Rogers and Nancy Ronke.
Tiara and Dr. Ronke are here, and I told them as they set up their presentation, I was just going to kind of give you guys, remind you of your homework as a board too. So a couple things before they start. They're giving you an update to let you know how year one is going in 9-12 Study Sync currently. And they have some beautiful things to highlight as they did in their presentation, and we'll be here for you tonight to answer questions. What I wanted to preview for you, though, is I think last Friday you got a stack, or in the mail came to your doorstep, the Study Sync materials. And some of you probably were like, oh, why do I have this? Because I already approved the resource. Why are you giving me the resource again? So I wanted to preview for you that it was the intent of some of our board members to make sure that although you approved the resource, the sentiment was that you also wanted to actually approve some of the titles in each of the units upcoming. And so how we talked as a team is that currently we're finishing Unit 2 currently, is that right?
Yep, we're into Unit 3.
Right, so we're just beginning Unit 3. So we're ready at this time, I would say, to bring forth to the board all the Unit 1 and Unit 2 for 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, and 12th grade. We're ready to bring those for your approval. In theory, there were probably, I would say, 4 to 6 titles that were used right out of the gates, but I've told a few board members this, if Dr. Ronke has her way, that she would want ideally the board to approve any accessible resource that our teachers could perhaps use in subsequent years. So again, why you got the resource again is because we want you to be able to have access to those texts. They will be here probably every month now, maybe, I think, as we end the school year here. And so as you look through, again, the grade level materials, as you have questions, please reach out to us, and we want to make sure that you're prepared to make those right decisions in the coming months.
Thank you.
All right.
Well, thank you for the detailed update in the presentation that you provided to us. I'm going to kick this off by maybe deferring to questions first. I think I'm looking at Mrs. Kozlowski because I think she spent some time in the classroom. And do you want to start us off? Okay.
So, thank you for the presentation. One of the focus areas is we talked about specific skill sets, right? So versus where we took a look at like the elementaries where I was looking at totality of am I achieving, am I improving over the course of the grades, which is a combination of things. Can you kind of talk through some of those individual, like if I'm looking holistically at this is the new curriculum, am I seeing the same traction and success that I'm seeing in other areas of new curriculum? And then followed that up, I think one of the pieces we talk about is staff appreciation of that, because I believe Study Sync had some challenges with the high school and how much work this is, and to take a look at it. It would be just good to get that feedback.
Right, there will be a survey that will be going out in March, and I think it's really important to keep in mind that it is a curricular resource, but then there's that instructional practice and the professional development around it that has to happen at the same time. Also the learning that happens in professional learning communities. So that's going to help the data improve as we go along. For first unit and second unit, there was a slide that really showed that because we focused a lot on rhetorical analysis, literary analysis, you're going to see for every single grade there was pretty substantial improvements that happened in a relatively short amount of time. Now granted, this isn't longitudinal data or anything, like this is just a snapshot, but it shows that students in 9th through 12th grade were able to very significantly, in a much better way, analyze authors' claims and arguments about a text. They were able to analyze the impact of an author's intentional moves. They were able to evaluate the reasoning throughout a text, which is really specific to high school. Like, that starts to happen in middle school, but in high school it's across a text. Like, how does a theme develop? How does a character change? And can they do that in just one text? Maybe, but can they do it in 3 or 4 texts and really compare? They were able to do that. That was happening in 9th grade. And are they able to analyze the different layers of a meaning of a word, like the connotation of a certain word? And there was a slide in that presentation that definitely showed that that didn't happen by accident. In PLCs, professional learning communities, and in coaching cycles, in big professional development sessions, we focused on reciprocal learning. What does that look like? How do students take ownership of their reading and their discussion and their writing? A lot of Socratic seminars happening. That's all student voice with an inner circle and outer circle, sometimes a cyber circle happening. There's a video that's linked there from Waukesha West High School for corner debates. And all of those things are really like almost like a synthesis paper in action with voice. We do have some areas of growth, but it's not a surprise because units 1 and 2 didn't necessarily focus on those areas that we need to grow for units 3 and 4. So on that next slide, we definitely need to grow where it says precise language and domain-specific vocabulary. You're going to see that, between 29 to 33% of proficiency, not growth, but proficiency with 9th graders. So we have some room to grow there. And then 61% proficiency for our 12th graders. And then the use of grammar actually really being embedded. So when we talk about things like phrases and clauses, we learn that and teach that in service of reading comprehension and writing comprehension. And people are probably sick of me saying this, but like when you teach something like subordinate clauses, the power of being able to use a subordinate clause when you speak and when you write is that there's an impact on the reader, there's an impact on the listener. So that's what we're going to be working on in units 3 and 4. And we'll see growth in those standards for sure.
you're going to see on that slide too, it just talks about the intentional, one of the big things that I'm talking about in all the professional learning communities I go to, just talked about it in an English 9 PLC today, is what are we doing to explicitly teach writing? Are we standing in front of the students and really writing in front of them, doing that think aloud, making mistakes in front of the students, showing them how things like subordinate clauses, adverbial phrases like empower writers and readers and speakers. But yeah, I don't think we have like enough data right now to see that, but I've been very pleased. Like, I think if we step back, never before have we been able to say, we've made this growth in this standard. Never. So to be able to see that traction just from the beginning of the school year, like for 12th grade, we were way below the 50 percentage proficiency, and then by January, the unit assessment, we're past 80% proficiency. That's huge, and that's not an accident. But we've never been able to show this before and show teachers, and that builds teacher efficacy. That builds like, oh my gosh, we do change students' brains, like it really does happen, and we can do it collectively very powerfully. I don't know if that answers your question.
It did. I mean, so to watch, I think I've mentioned several times, to watch this new curriculum and be able to see how the teachers, the students are engaging and watch it was amazing. I think it was probably, the highlight of what I've been able to see on the board is to give the tools into the hands that is actually going to be able to make a difference, and that's what we're seeing. So we're seeing new curriculum, it's structured. I love the sessions of what I would call like your teacher breakouts. Mm-hmm. It's so powerful to watch the engagement and how they're all sharing through all of that. Is that something that we do for other subjects as well? So it's similar, this is not just a process for new curriculum, but it's kind of the standard that we're putting across is to collaborate and make sure that we're working together to team build and build.
Yes.
It's incredibly impressive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the professional learning communities, you heard Hadfield's principals speak about that as well. Like that is, you can't have systematic change without them. It's the engine that drives everything. And so you have the professional learning like for whole group, but then you have the PLCs that are running the professional learning communities and then the coaching. Without those three things, it doesn't move forward. And it can move forward very quickly, especially in professional learning communities, because they're peer coaching each other.
Yeah.
That's what's powerful.
But the progress with a solid curriculum that's unified across that is making a significant difference incredibly fast.
Yeah, and you saw like Unit 1, it was a little, because it was so rapid. Like August 2nd is when some people saw it, August 24th is when some people learned about it for the first time, and students came a few days later. So yes, Unit 1 maybe was a little bit rough, but like you heard North teachers speak about, by Unit 2, they understood what was happening.
It's excellent. This is really good. Thank you.
Mr. Como.
I was completely fascinated by teacher writing and showing how they develop their thoughts and form their sentences. And I obviously when I was growing up, we were taught in a very different manner. And I was just thinking, I don't think I ever saw a teacher write. And how powerful that is. We speak of modeling all the time. And a lot of times we talk about modeling behavior. Well, what about modeling other tasks like writing? Wow. It's just, I was blown away. So one of the questions that I had was, what is that frequency of seeing, and you might not know the answer to that yet because this is all relatively new, but what is the anticipated frequency of students witnessing their teacher sitting down and attacking something and writing about it?
It's a really great question, and that's actually something that we're going to be working on, is really having like, here are the 5 components of reading or literacy, and then what are our like guaranteed routines that are connected to that. So when it comes to something like vocabulary, domain-specific vocabulary, one of the routines would be explicitly writing in front of students. And then there's going to be like a peer accountability piece with PLCs, but then also with principals being able to see that and give feedback. We're not there yet. We're probably, I don't know, 3 months away from that. Like, we're working on it, I'm typing it up, and that's going to be shown to small teams, and then by next year, we'd be able to really implement that. That's not happening as much as we want right now, but that hasn't been the intense focus in units 1 and 2. So that's going to happen in the professional learning communities, and then that will spread.
Yeah, and I think it's an opportunity for teachers to show vulnerability too. You have to be vulnerable as you're presenting as we debate. I mean, so you're doing this live, and so I think that there's opportunity for teacher growth too here as we go down this path. So it's very, very fascinating.
You might really like Kelly Gallagher. Just Google like the Grecian urn. It's a chapter from his book, and it talks about how you can't just present a final piece of writing to a student and say, here you go, like this is the example, here's the rubric, because they won't believe that they can just create something like that. Well, a teacher can't just create something like that either. There's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that goes into writing, a lot of revision.
Mm-hmm.
The revision is actually where you learn it.
And in addition to what Nancy has shared, our instructional framework at the high school level is graduate release of responsibility, and we spent a lot of professional learning around the different components. And within focus instruction, we really focus with the teachers on, you need to model your thinking. You need to be intentional. The students need to see that live. So just in regards to our instructional framework of gradual release of responsibility, that supports the work that we're trying to do. So we don't want them to see it as two separate things we're asking them to do. It's a part of our instructional framework.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Well, I had the opportunity to participate in the professional development session in January. I appreciate that opportunity greatly. I admit I ran home and read Animal Farm again because I was just so motivated by listening to the students. What I appreciate very much was the focus on that professional development that also included the skills development for how to engage the students, the difference between popcorn reading and reciprocal reading, and just noticed and observed that there's a lot of science and skill that's going into what we're putting into the classroom, and I think that's making a difference. The one thing that I'm just curious about, because I greatly appreciate what we're doing at the elementary level now with phonics and phonemic awareness, and Nancy and I have even talked about, like, our high school students today did not get that phonics education then. And so when you listen to some of them try to read, they're not always understanding the word. So how much of that is part of this, and does that change as the students come to these classes more prepared with the phonemic awareness, or just that even punctuation is another part of it? So I'm just curious, like, how much do we have to compensate for that now versus what we might do in the future?
It's urgent. Like, we have to do something now. We can't wait until like a new group of students come through. Something that we're working on is having the 5 areas of literacy. So phonemic awareness would be part of that. But then what does that look like? Like, what's a routine that would happen in an ELA classroom, 612, that we could guarantee? And one of the things is something called a cognitive content dictionary. So then when you show a vocabulary word, you're actually going to break it down by the sounds and go over that. You're going to also look at the morphemes in that word. You're going to look at the prefix, the suffix. You're going to look for any cognates that are in Spanish. And really intentionally plan for that. But there is a pretty substantial gap, and that's why writing in front of students and thinking about what you're going to be doing as a writer will help the phonological awareness. It'll help the phonics. It's almost like doing it backwards, because the students that we have right now have compensated. They have tons of compensation type of strategies. So it only takes 5 to 10 minutes to really fill that gap that they might have. There's things that we can investigate, like phoneme graphing mapping, rhyme magic. There's things that can just be used for 5, 10, 15 minutes in small groups that work incredibly well, and that's all part of definitely what we're working on.
The growth is obviously evident, so what, in the implementation process here, if you were to say, we need more of, or you could benefit from, or just in reflecting, would have done differently or would have been more ideal to have, what would that be?
Time. Yeah,
Time.
I think time. Yeah, August was really a tough time. That was tight. So like another 2 or 3 months, but we can't go backwards. So I think moving forward, at least one of those professional learning sessions together with students, with different stakeholders, having that once a quarter would be very ideal, because I'm trying to explain like really what happens. There's a graphic in the slideshow, but what happens when everybody experiences something like an anchor experience, especially with students there, then as soon as they're in professional learning communities that very next day, it gains traction. They're like, well, let's try it out. I haven't done that before. In a lot of classes I've been in, they have done the observation report. They've done more Socratic seminars. They are doing the reciprocal learning. I was just at South yesterday, and the teacher whom I love, she's like, it didn't go well, but it was only my second day. And I said, well, it didn't go well for 7 of the students. You have 24 or 25 students in here. Let's like regroup. So teachers, it just starts the engine. It really is important to have those common times at least once per quarter. And we don't have enough of that. Something we're thinking about is more peer coaching, especially for next year, so that it's a multiplier effect. Perhaps having a stipend for teachers who could be a peer coach. So there's a teacher at North, he's very good at cognitive content dictionary. He could go in and start with the ELA team, coach, take 15 to 30 minutes per week, and then after he's done with the ELA department, because I'm selfishly going to start with them, but then he could move to different disciplines. He could do that in social studies, science, and that makes that teacher a consultant. It empowers them. It maintains teachers so they want to stay here in Waukesha, and it just makes everybody better. It's a multiplier effect. So.
Just one last question. I think there's a benefit for our students who kind of experience Study Sync through their high school experience. Are there limitations, or have we created any with our AP students, or if a student wants to pop into AP English Comp 11, which is a fantastic class, and then back into Study Sync, are there challenges with that?
Not necessarily, because the instructional framework is the same. Like, for example, like you could take like an initial read in Study Sync, and it's really just a text, and it'll have scaffolds, it'll have resources, it'll have videos that go with it, which are great. But the instructional practice that the teacher uses is really what makes the impact. So that English 11 class, I was just in that class 2 days ago. They did a Socratic seminar. When you go into an English 11 class, they are also doing Socratic seminars with multiple texts. They're comparing and contrasting, and sometimes 4 or 5 texts. In my humble opinion, really, we're closing the gap pretty quickly on AP honors and what was core. So we have to start thinking about that and what that could look like in the future.
That's exciting.
Mm-hmm. It is exciting. It is.
All right. I don't see any other questions. Well, thank you very much for the update. So we're back next month with supplemental reading materials.
Unit 1 and 2 for all grade levels, 9, 10, 11, 12.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to thank the board members who came to the professional learning and came to North High School and talked to teachers. Thank you very much. It meant more than you realize.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nancy. Thanks, Tiara.
All right. Moving on to a key performance indicator update. Welcome to Jen Gennerman, and we have our North leadership team.
Yeah, so thanks for being here, Tom and Christina. So I mentioned this to a few of you, but not everybody. We're kind of transitioning more deeply into our KPI reporting out to the board. So Love the addition of Jen and what she's brought to putting voice to the data, and she's going to show you some great celebrations too in terms of just accessibility of the data. But where I want to transition now in kind of our presentations moving forward is to bring some school principals in their rookie year, right, to tell you how they're operationalizing or putting into action the KPI. So the KPIs are not just accountable dashboard out in space, but how are they putting it to action day to day, and they'll be able to tell the story. So North is doing a great job around GPA. They're going to get really specific on what they're doing with departments, what they're doing school-wide. So you'll kind of see this routine moving forward, that Jen will be the expert around the data reporting, and then we'll try to have a principal here to show actually what they're doing at the school level.
Thanks for the kickoff. So I shared a lot of the information in the presentation, but is there something you'd like me to highlight or just kind of go over just the basics from the GPA data?
Well, I think, and feel free if folks have thoughts about where they want to go with this, without necessarily rehashing the charts and things, I think we would be very curious to hear how the work around the KPI, I would be curious to hear the work around the KPIs. When we look at the numbers, 58 to 62 plus or minus some number of standard deviations, which I don't know what they are. The first question I even had for Mrs. Landish was, well, what's the upper limit, right? Is there an upper limit? And what does that even look like? But I hope there's not one. But I'd love to hear a little bit about how you take this into your leadership conversations about student outcomes.
And actually, is it okay if I just start real quick? So starting with that, I'll take a moment back to our January Professional Development Day where we met with all the principals, and that's really where we spent time on how we've enhanced our data system. And so moving forward, one of the biggest requests has been around not only data that principals are using, but even feedback from that day was, hey Jen, we don't only need the cumulative GPA information on this KPI dashboard for their school. The biggest request was to also see the term GPA data. And so today a message went out with a little happy emoji that, they now can have that cumulative GPA data as well as the term GPA data available to them at any minute as they go throughout their work and continuous improvement. So from that day, when we had all of the principals together, we were talking about the GPA data and sharing strategic actions, and this is really where, we looked at each other and said, okay, you guys have got to share this. So it was great to hear them share a little bit more with their colleagues as well, and then to have them here tonight.
So this graphic up here, this was put together by one of our assistant principals, Brian Schley, that I really think does a great job of breaking down at the top there, the KPIs that we talk about here at the district level, all the way down to the teacher level and what individual teachers are doing inside their classroom to break down their data and implement strategies that are effective for student learning. And so we have the KPI level, the key performance indicators that we discuss here. From there, at each site team, North specifically in our case, our SAIL team meets in June to develop our theory of action. So what is our if then what idea going into the next school year? What's going to be the thing that gives us our biggest bang for our buck, for example. And so for that, for the past couple of years, we've been looking at student GPA, and so we'd set some pretty intentional targets and goals out for 4 years. And so from there, once we've had our theory and action in place, then we take it down to our individual school level. And so what we've been doing is working on what we call our ASGs, or our Analyzing Student Grades, that Mrs. Ali will talk about in just a second. And so teachers are looking at and analyzing grades on a monthly basis. So they're looking at each individual class level, as well as the different subset of students whose data we're taking a look at. So in North's case, we're looking at all students, we're looking at our special education students, and we're looking at our English language learner students. And so we're analyzing student grades at all three of those subsets, and then breaking it down even so far as the A, B, C, D, and IE level. Then from there, our teachers are implementing individual classroom plans, implementing our Wicker strategies, our AVID strategies inside their classrooms, and then are each individually setting their own really kind of theory of action and if-then statement that changes each month to month. We then, as administrators, provide feedback to each teacher monthly to provide them with some reflection questions, some celebrations. A lot of our teachers do a really nice job of it. We have a rubric in place that we actually go through and we score teachers on their ASGs and provide those follow-up questions and reflective questions as well.
So what we have here is an example of an ASG. So you'll kind of see here, so we have the class blocked, but it's broken down by specific hour. And on the left-hand side, you'll see our teachers look at their total number of students. And then Angela Gerlowski, she's our instructional coach at North, her and I put this together via a spreadsheet so that when teachers implement their numbers, they input let's say how many kids they have and then how many students are at that BC level or higher, which to us is kind of that level of 2.8. And spreadsheet is amazing and it automatically figures out the percentages for the staff so they don't have to do any of that math on their own. And it actually, Angela created a formula so that it automatically turns, let's say if they're meeting our target, turns it green. If they're almost to the target, it's yellow, and if it's below target, it's red. So you can see that our teachers are breaking down their data based on total number of students, our special education students, as well as our EL students. And this is data that we are continuously reflecting on. And then when they go through the process, so they have to identify again, as Tom noted, whether or not, how many students are at that minimal D or IE level, how many are at that basic, that C or D level, that proficient B or BC, and then that advanced A or AB, which we want all of our kids obviously to be at. So they break those numbers down as well. And then finally, which we don't have up here, but what we have our staff do, again, as Tom more or less mentioned, is what practices am I going to put into place in order to reach the kids that are not meeting our expectation of being in a BC or higher. So, for example, they'll identify, I'll go back to like the study sync conversation. We had one teacher identify that I'm going to continue to model writing because I noticed that my students are not revising their writing. So I'm going to model what that looks like for them. And then what we do as administrative teams, and actually me and Tom go in together to classrooms a lot to see what's been going on in the classrooms. We go and see their practices in action and how it's impacting students so that we can give them feedback not only on their ASGs but also their intentional planning that is happening and taking place in the classrooms. And we have seen over the course of this year great gains and more intentionality behind what our teachers are doing. So as an AVID school, we do expect our teachers to incorporate writing and inquiry, collaboration, organization, and reading every single day. And now we're seeing our staff be really intentional with those practices. So ensuring that the writing that they're doing is going to bring about learning, or the reading that they're doing is going to cause our students to grow over time. So it's really exciting.
Then we're sharing out this data with our staff internally as well. So I put out a monthly academic report that, as you can see up here, breaks down all students' grades, our special education students' grades, and our English language learner grades. Try to do some comparisons of month to month, year to year as well, and then breaking it down by department as well, with the theory being we can foster collaboration behind, this department seems to be doing particularly well with their student grades. Let's collaborate with that department, for example. What departments could use more observation feedback to see some growth and improvement as well.
And as you can see here, we've seen a great gain in our BC levels here. So this is our overall grade. So our goal for all students is to be at a 65% or higher at the BC level. Currently, we're at a 73%. So we're not only meeting that goal, but we're exceeding it. Same with our special education. Our goal was 46%. We're at 51%. Same with English language learners. Our goal was 42, and we're at 68%. So again, with intentionality, not only like with our ASGs, but then focusing on, okay, what do our teachers need in terms of professional development and some learning around supporting our special education and English language learners, we're seeing great gains throughout the entire building.
And we really have to credit our teachers. They have been really open to feedback. They've been very open to us coming in, along with our other administrators and Angela, our instructional coach, to receive that feedback and implement it on a timely basis.
Mrs. Kozlowski.
I'm a data. I like the data. All right, so we went kind of fast. I just want to slow down a little bit to. I liked the discussion of your request to have GPA by term versus cumulative, because Jen, you called out appropriately, right? So my juniors and seniors right now, if we are making advancements to write them, we're almost too late on a cumulative level to really see that take impact, right? But we can see it on a term base.
Yep.
And I think that may be something going forward for us to call out with our KPIs. I think that's an important distinction, and it shows us that we're winning. Not that, but that's important, right? When we start to say we're making the needle turn and we're trying to do this, I think that was a great recommendation. The goals that you have listed here, are those your goals that you came up for your specific?
Yeah, so those were goals that we created at Summer Institute in June based on the data that we previously had from the year before. So I don't know what the exact numbers are, but we did, expand our goal to make them reasonable, obtainable, and it's amazing that we've surpassed them as much as we have. Just we haven't seen this kind of growth in a number of years, so.
Yeah. Can you just walk me through? So continuous improvement, so all students showed grade improvement. Is that how that is?
This is the percentage of final first semester grades that were at a BC or higher.
Okay.
So our goal is our goal is 65%. So 73% of all students' grades first semester were at a BC or higher.
Great. And is that goal going to change? Right? So
Yeah.
We'll change it.
We'll
do we
have,
change it now to 73? That's your new benchmark?
Yep, it'll be, actually, it is 73 for next year as it stands right now, and it's 81 the year after that. So.
Okay, so you're increasing and driving the change as you move forward?
Yep, and you probably can't see it too well on our presentation here, but we did establish goals for the next 3 years so that we can hit that 80% mark by year 3.
Okay. How are the students? Obviously, they're responding well, but that seems encouraging to me, right? So we're empowering the students somewhere in there that they can achieve great things, because that's our belief for all of our students, and that is showing up.
And they will advocate for themselves to us, to their counselors, to make sure that they're demonstrating mastery.
Great, thank you.
I'll jump in. I appreciate the departmental view. I am also curious if you have looked at it by core graduation requirements versus electives, and if that makes any difference.
I don't think we have yet, but I think that's worth looking at. I appreciate that.
Yeah, more just a curiosity.
Yeah.
And the thing I just wanted to reiterate, because, some people could say, well, it's a grade, so it's subjective to some degree, right? And I know there was some discussion about, what actually contributes to the grade. But I think the standards-based grading and the consistency that we have with a lot of the new curriculum, as well as just the consistency, really is what ensures that moving that number is not just, loosening requirements, but it's really that more of those standards are being hit. So I think that's a real positive. And just a level of granularity and the fact that you're using the data to kind of reinforce the priorities and classroom activities, I think is really fantastic and positive. Any other questions or comments?
This is just a compliment to you guys, because you're the first team, but this is now the standard that I am expecting from the rest of the schools.
Nice job,
right?
North.
So you've laid the framework, and this is outstanding. And this is what we're looking for, to be able to see and measure and have some insight. This is very good. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mr. Moore might have had a follow-up or a final
To
question.
say you all did an exceptional job, so job well done for you all and your team. So thank you so much. This is great news, and we're making great gains, so thank you because of you. So.
Exciting.
Mr. Coleman.
Do you plan on sharing some of the tools with your colleagues?
We already have.
Yeah, so they do in their PLCs each month, they bring their ASGs, as we call them, the fancy charts, to their PLC groups and share best practices. We've had one PLC do collaborative walkthroughs together, both to look at both vertical and horizontal alignment, so to walk through other classes when they're in their department, but also other classes, within the same grade level that they teach. So we're really trying to build a community of collaboration, because I think we've got a lot of smart people in our building, that once we're working together and sharing ideas with one another, that's the best way we can strengthen our students and our results. So.
How about cross?
Oh, I knew that's what you were going to ask. No, that's all right, but he does that.
I'm in the North Bubble, I'm so sorry.
No, he's not in the North
That's a good bubble to be in. You should be in that bubble.
He dips outside of that North Bubble very well. I was going to say, as we mentioned, as Nancy mentioned, professional learning communities being a lever and a guarantee in the system, we expect that same level of collaboration and modeling with our principal teams. They are constantly collaborating. We had a session this afternoon where the high school, everyone is together, our K-12 administrators. So yes, they steal, they borrow, we scale best practices. That's one of the things that constitutes a successful organization, is how can you scale success?
Mm-hmm.
So we are doing that very frequently, and yes, they do that too.
I meet with Brian and Maria next Tuesday.
Yeah. So, I just want to say too, credit to Jen, going back to the Wise-Local dashboard. I don't know if it was a dream that I told you that this happened for you, or did I put it in an update, or I'm telling you now for the first time, is that you also have access to that KPI dashboard page on Wise-Local as a board member. So you'll be able to see in real time the same indicators up there as they get updated, that our principals to do, not the drill down to the student piece, but you'll see enough information just to get you dangerous in there too. So thank you for working with local on that and just getting our data where it needs to be so we can make impact. So thank you.
Thank you. I think that Mrs. Kozlowski logs in at around 6 a.m. and then logs out at 9 or 10 p.m. at night.
We can check usage. We can check usage on that.
And thank you for saying that. It's exciting to share that with the principals and even you guys, because as I first came on the team, people were like, well, we don't have data. And honestly, kudos to the teams. They've been manually calculating some of this work and to get these goals. So the idea is that when we come back together and they start their goals for next year, while they have the data that they have going now, they also have it in a click of a button, a couple clicks, and they can have that information. And if they wanted to drill down to a student, a certain student group, they can do that. And so we're looking to be effective and efficient. Thanks.
Wonderful.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
All right, the next item on our agenda is for discussion only, is an update on the common school funding purchases, for which there are about 1,000 attachments to the agenda item. I expect that everybody read those in great detail. Are there any thoughts, questions, or reactions to those attachments? And again, thank you to Mrs. Landish and our media specialist for providing that information for us. Mrs. Kozlowski.
This question is intentional. Can you just walk us through the library specialists' kind of process when they're going to purchase new books? Right? What are they looking for? For example, the common theme in this month was a lot of a refugee's journey, right, from various separate countries and all that, which interesting, right? So I'm looking, and I know that we have a lot of the common school funding that is coming in dedicated for us to continue to enhance our library books. I'd just like a high-level overview again as to what are they looking to purchase, what's the guidance, and how they're doing that.
Right, so a lot of that and what you mentioned is kind of theme-based around some of the topics in our core curriculum. So if there are different lit circles or they want additional books, the teachers will come to them and say, we're on this unit, we need a surplus here if they don't have it. So it's driven sometimes by curricular need, sometimes by student need, and then sometimes just as a collaborative team, I would say, getting together. They're looking at titles, new books, bestsellers. They also, I would say, as I'm learning to grow with them, right, in this new process in learning and growing with them, they are constantly looking at the weeding out process and seeing what books are matted and we need update updated copies of. So I think that's a very fluid process for them as well. And I'm noticing that when titles come across, they'll put like damaged or missing, and then they'll try to upkeep the collection in that way. So I think there's a lot of different variables driven from sort of different stakeholders, but they've been very collaborative in the process, and they've put up with a lot from me, so I have to thank them again for just being so collaborative as I work through these new processes with them.
Any other questions? Mr. Zenobia?
In going through the list, part of what I noticed, at least in this month versus a couple of others, there seemed to be a lot more nonfiction titles. Is that fair? I mean, majority seem to be that way, whereas in the past there's been a lot of fiction. I know the reason I bring that up is we had a conversation way back when, months ago, about balancing our libraries with more content that is nonfiction versus fiction. We felt through the audit that we were maybe a little heavy in the area of fiction versus other areas. So this is 1 month, I'm just assuming that just kind of, as you mentioned, ebbs and flows based on need and where we're going. But overall, has that been, as we move forward through the year, are we still looking to do that to some extent, or?
So what you're referring to with that audit was the actual classroom library audit that we did in the secondary classrooms. So if I am a 9th grade ELA teacher, that audit that you saw and are referring to is the actual classroom library, not the school library. So we have not done an audit of the entire school libraries in terms of fiction versus nonfiction.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Anything else? I ask this every time, but for the committee's feedback, is this information still desired and helpful? Okay. We'll continue down this path.
I think we're getting there. Ms. Landish and I talked about how long do we continue. She's obviously investing a significant amount of manpower into reviewing the purchases, which I think is at a point in time that is needed. But we are going to take a look at moving forward into an audit type approach at some point. So that would take a look at where we're looking potentially quarterly, that just like any other type of audit, that we just do a spot check of audits, take a look at what we're purchasing, and move on. And I think we're getting close to that, but another month or so. And I think even with Ms. Landish's feedback, that's about where we're looking at.
Okay. All right, moving on to the next item on the agenda is discussion and request for approval of the ESSER Year 2 projections. Turn it over to you.
Wonderful. So here we are. It's sometimes feels like 5 years ago that you approved the first round of funding, but it was just under a year ago that you approved the first round of funding. So thank you. We're back for Year 2 at a glance. So just to reiterate, and Stacy, thank you for pulling that up. I won't need every slide, and I think I'll take the same approach as the other areas did, but I do want to highlight some high-level pieces, both for the board and for the public. So just to remind everybody that this money came forth, and specifically the learning recovery percentages that we're talking about today, we needed to have at least 20% of ESSER funds allocated to, in essence, learning loss. And so if you look at the very last slide of the presentation, I know this came up at F&F last night too, Darren, certainly after all the details come to fruition, he will give you even the most updated pie charts. But coming into this meeting, should the board be able to approve my Year 2 projections this year of the $2,780,000, that will total to the first year projections. That will total over 2 years us spending $6,202,000, I can't even count this high, right? $184.12. So we are at 35%. This board has committed 35% of that money for, I would say, academics and for learning loss. So just appreciative of that and want everybody to know in a transparent way that that's what that funding is for. The areas of projected cost remain the same as the areas or the buckets that it was in year one. So we have divided it into acceleration, tutoring, summer school programming. There's Playworks, which was supported last year at the elementary level. Our dual enrollment programs for students, our teacher training, which I think we've heard tonight and a lot of times how important this is for the upstart of successful curricular implementation. And then the big bucket of money truly is that standards-aligned instructional resources. And last year, the board approved the $2.3 million for that bucket of resources. And the ask for the year two projections is the $1.9 million for the standards-aligned materials. I think it's important also to put context into this when some people might look at those totals and just really wonder, what does that mean for the system? I have, in years past, before the ESSER monies, have had a total of just over 1.1 million as a total operating budget in teaching and learning. So you can see this money has given us like years' worth of being us able to fast track these materials for our students. And again, I just couldn't be more happy or appreciative about that. A lot of the same were repeated in terms of the ask for year two, so I guess I just want to open it up if the board has specific questions about any of the areas. And we'll go from there.
I will maybe just get started just in terms of what you've listed. There are a lot of long-term investments, or what I would say the 6 to 8 year investment of new curriculum, high-quality curriculum. Obviously, we're keeping your team and our teachers very busy with bringing all that on.
Yes.
Have you and Darren talked at all about, Darren Clark, talked at all about anything on this list that needs to go back into our regular annual operating, if it's a subscription or an annual recurring, and what that looks like? Because that would be something that we're not currently planning in our operating budget, but we need to kind of be aware of that.
Right, so we've had a few conversations at the cabinet level, and certainly Darren driving that in terms of, we don't really have a textbook fund in the district. And what he has asked me since I've been in this position is he wants a multi-year projection of resources. And so I have been able to give him our 3-year projections. We hit the 2 highest years, and it just so happens that the funding is here for it, so it's worked out well. So we will see a dip in 24-25 that'll become a little bit more steady, but to your point, in the 6th year, a lot of these are 6 and 8 year adoptions. That's when we're going to see the high spike again when a lot of these resources come to renewal. But we are having those conversations with all the financial conversations that we're having, having at the cabinet level.
And the only thing I think I missed on this proposal that was on last year's, and I don't know if, I vaguely recall that we paid for more than 1 year's worth of service with Care Solace. Is that one that we still have continuing service with?
So the money that was supported last year with Care Solace actually went through this year as well. I did check with Dr. Cook on that. So the allocation in year 1 took us through the 2-year.
Perfect. I think that was an important addition. What else? Mr. Zenobia.
Thank you. More of a comment to start. I know the board, I believe all the members of the board were very especially Dr. Piasek, wanted to spend more on recovery than what was, I guess, outlaid as a recommendation when all the assessor money came. And so I'm glad that we're doing that. I hope it's enough. It certainly seems to be making an impact. And so that was part of my question, was how much of this would potentially be needed to plan for, 6 years, as you said, out. And, would we have shortfalls in the future, as we already have cuts to make? So is there, I guess, to go a little further, is there, maybe I missed a dollar figure that we have in mind that when some of these 6-year resources run out, that we'd be looking at in the future, or not necessarily? And if you don't have it, I'm just...
Yeah, I have not done the 6-year projections. I have as of last year, I have a 3-year projection. In 6 years, if what we've done on our spreadsheet is we mark out, if it's a 6-year, 8-year subscription, et cetera, you can imagine it's going to be matched or quite a bit, especially now, higher for the pricing. I mean, I look at our elementary math adoption that we have coming forth in the next few months, and it is just going to be, no matter which of the two resources we choose, it's going to be just short of $1 million for the entire elementary math adoption. So,
okay,
it's a lot of money. It needs to, obviously, in my opinion, be prioritized with our academic priorities, and I think we're fortunate that we can make that happen, but there's going to obviously be some other compromises, so, long-term.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I know that you're looking for an approval from us on this. Are there any other questions or recommendations? Or motions? Mr. Como?
Yeah, I move approval of the year 2 projections for the ESSER funds as presented.
Second.
Seconded by Mrs. Kozlowski. Any other discussion? Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes 5-0. Happy shopping. All right, moving on to the final item on our agenda tonight, which is discussion and possible action on board policy 9130.01, complaints concerning educational materials and library materials. Mrs. Landish.
So I will start with some background on this. It is important, I think I want to start with our policies that were laid out from Neola as early as October this year. So this was one policy that was recommended in a group of policies coming from Neola back in October. So we have had this policy in our hands for some time, and this policy, as recommended from Neola, was revised to reflect the process for requests relative to materials available in the district's library that are not a part of the district's classroom instructional materials. As we know, our current policy 9130 is the process for communicating with the board regarding the classroom instructional materials. So in getting this policy originally, we had a lot of conversation about wanting to have a similar, clear process for any type of complaint in the system, whether it be a library book or a curricular area text. So how we decided to use the policy language from Neola was to incorporate it in our current policy 9130.01. So you can see on the policy a lot of strike-throughs, and as mentioned, the consideration process really has gone away in the proposed policy. This policy was a collaborative effort over several months of revision, both with myself, administrators, and our librarians. They had their hand in the language. They had a lot of questions, a lot of feedback to give, and I feel it was a very collaborative process. A few things to mention when you're looking at the policy. Again, I just want you to focus on the green language. And the first part talks about what the board believes in terms of school libraries being a fundamental part of the educational process. The second part talks about the superintendent, in collaboration with the media specialist, shall establish procedures related to the selection of materials, removal of aged or unused materials. I kind of mentioned that in terms of the weeding process, they call it, inventory, repair, or replacement. Mentioning the district's allocation of common school funds, which we've exceedingly tried to be transparent about. The third statement talks about our non-discrimination statement in relation to any of its selection and evaluation of resources. And so I think that is important to have as part of the policy, because it removes any discriminatory decision-making that could perhaps happen around contested materials. The fourth paragraph talks about complaints specific to, again, educational and library materials, and what the process would be as outlined in the Library Media Handbook. As published on our website, the Library Media Handbook in Section 6, and I know I've attached that for you as well, but the complaints concerning the library materials is clearly outlined, and I'm just going to go over the highlights of the process, because I think it's, I like the way the clarity is provided, and I want to make sure everybody knows what that process is, so you're able to ask questions and be firm with how you're voting tonight. Any complaint can be gathered from any constituent, be a student, a parent, a staff, or any citizen of our school district. And ideally, an informal resolution is the first step, and so that person would go ideally to the school where a book they think is egregious or should not be accessible to our children. And so the first part of the process is then that school principal, in collaboration with the school library media specialist, would try to work it out with whatever the complaint is and see and make a decision at the site level. That would be step one. The second step would be then if they make a decision that the complainant disagrees with, or there's a disagreement, then they would engage in a larger committee with similar membership as was listed in the consideration process, but a committee of the following members would then be formed. It would be 2 teachers, 1 student services rep, 1 coach or coordinator, building administrators, library media specialists, and 1 district designee. And so that still, that would be part of a broader internal review. Then they would give the recommendation to the superintendent's designee, which in this case is the assistant superintendent, of which recommendations can come out of that team in one of, right now, the desired outcomes would be retaining it at the school at the age-appropriate level, perhaps moving it to a different level, or removal of materials, because as the policy states, it would be deemed harmful to minors. If you look at how the decisions 1, 2, 3, 4 are outlined, the language deemed harmful to minors does come from statute 948.11, and it really, that statute talks about removal being indicative of sexually explicit and obscene content and or expletive language. So those really are the 2 indicators in terms of accessibility to minors. If for some reason the concern cannot be resolved at this level, then a formal complaint may be registered through the superintendent. And so the complainant would then appeal in writing to the board president within 10 days of that determination or the communication. The board committee then appointed by the board president would review the appeal. That meeting would happen in open meetings policy, and the decision of the board then would be final. So that is intense, but very, hopefully it gives you an overview of how we want to follow, strategically that process and what the collaboration involved along the way would entail.
Thank you for that background, Jody. Any initial thoughts or questions? Mrs. Kozlowski.
Ms. Landish, in your time as superintendent, how many times have we had complaints that have been taken up to a committee level?
So we have had one request in 2014 taken to the consideration process, and I did check with the superintendent's cleric about this. It was looking for Alaska in 2014, so one.
Okay. And so if I am a parent and I am reviewing much of the discussions that we have been having as a community, as a district, are surrounding the parental rights. And so if there is a book that is being part of the curriculum that I may or may not approve with, the procedure to date is that I would reach out to the teacher and or principal and either opt my child out of that, correct, for a curriculum approved pieces. As it relates to library materials, which is the one part that our community is very fired up about, and while I understand that, I think the objection here is that we are not looking to censor books. I just reviewed 200 plus books as part of the audit as our current purchases that were all required or asked from our teaching staff to be present, that could be part of the curriculum. Those are not being censored. That is not the goal. As a district, it is our responsibility and our obligation to ensure that the materials that we provide in our school libraries are balanced, age appropriate, and free from harm to minors. And that is the obligation of this board. That is the obligation that I take a stand with. I appreciate this policy outlining that, because truly the direction that we were struggling with is the books are creating a lot of discussions. We have highlighted many books within our libraries that quite honestly should not be available to children under the age of 18. And so this, I think, appropriately gives us those tools to reach out and follow a process that is utilizing people that are the experts of education. We are talking to the library's media specialists. We are talking to the principals. And to date, most of those requests that have come through have been in agreement with the library media specialist and the principal that we have not seen these escalate. Okay, so that's just from a background too, as to trying to address the many concerns that we've heard from the community. So from that standpoint, I'd like to redirect into taking a look at the actual policy 9130.01. I would make the recommendation to strike the third paragraph. We have a non-discrimination policy. Our non-discrimination policy is noted in several other policies. I do not think that we need to duplicate that in every policy. And then in the first paragraph, where it starts with complaints, I think the second such sentence should be, an informal resolutions of complaints is encouraged to informally begin with the staff member and or principal. I think there's this kind of sentences kind of duplicate in there. So effectively it would read, complaints regarding educational materials or specific library materials may be registered by students, parents, staff, or citizens of the school district. An informal resolution of complaints is encouraged to to begin with the staff member and/or principal. And then it can go into material which has been acquired will continue to be used during the review process. Refer to policy 2521, the superintendent, et cetera, et cetera. And Ms. Landish, I do also appreciate you clarifying the separation of this policy, which is different from curriculum.
Well, this would mean any process for any complainant would be following
both.
This clear process for both, right? We don't want to sit in a world of two different ways to complain and how we handle it. I
Agreed.
want it to be consistent for staff and for everybody.
All right, and then the next discussion item that I have would be actually referring to the handbook. I don't have a set total recommendation.
Mrs. Kozlowski, could I just ask, if you don't mind, on the topic of the corrections that you were making, could we see if there's any comment on that first, or question, before we move on? Mr. Como?
Yeah, you proposed to strike the third paragraph, and that reflects that we do not discriminate. I don't know if I agree wholeheartedly with that. Sometimes you want to keep pieces in front of people and reiterate things. At a minimum, what we should do, if instead of striking it, we should make reference to the appropriate policy and say, we're non-discriminatory, and you can see this policy. So something maybe might shorten it up where we don't spell it out every time, but let's at least give the right reference to it.
If I could put a follow-up comment on that, I do agree with Mr. Como. I think for the purposes of simplifying our overall policy conversations, it might make sense to do that everywhere. I know we had a technical correction that came through a year or so ago that hit most policies, but maybe not all, so we run the risk of where we repeat those definitions that they're not consistent. But that might be something, too, that we could send back to the policy committee and ask for some guidance on how to do that, as opposed to trying to deal with that as a problem when we're looking at this particular policy.
And there may be a very good reason that Neola recommends, or our attorneys recommend keeping it in there.
Because they're not looking at the whole policy set when we're on a specific topic.
So, I mean, because I like to sometimes take things to an extreme. So sometimes we reference a number of policies, right? I mean, you look at the bottom and we have 5, 6, 7, maybe references. Mm-hmm. We reference statutes. So we still want the read of the policy to be complete and not have people always jumping to a policy that spells it out. So I think there's a balance there. I don't know what the appropriate balance is, and I don't know if Dr. Cook has run into this kind of discussion with Neola before.
Yeah, when we've developed policies both through Neola and talked to our own attorneys about it, the policy is written and approved by the board. I mean, that's your function, but it has to be friendly for the person who needs to use it. And so when you're looking at something where you could make decisions that could potentially be discriminatory, it's important to put the non-discrimination policy there. So you'd see that in the food service policy, you see that in our bullying policy, obviously our anti-harassment discrimination policies and such. So you want to make sure that that statement is front and center, so the person who's grabbing the policy to make sure that they know how to implement it, it's right there. Knowing that we have been challenged on policy before, also knowing that we had the Title IX issue regarding, I don't know, what it was, lacrosse that lasted us a decade. It's important to make sure that we pay attention to some of these details, staff-wise, the people who have to implement it, so that, it is front and center. The person who reads the policy and says, all right, what do I need to do for complaints? They may not necessarily go back and look at the non-discrimination policy or review the non-discrimination statement, even though we cross-reference that at the bottom. For the important things, the meat and potatoes of a policy, we want to make sure that that's front and center for the staff who have to implement it, or the community who has to understand it.
Thank you. We can certainly come back to, if you want to make an amendment recommendation after we've had some of the discussion, or I mean, you can do that anytime you want to. I had a follow-up question on the fourth paragraph, where I just wanted to make sure that the way it reads applies both to educational materials and library materials. So I think what you suggested was striking, after the word encouraged, keeping that sentence, the complainant should meet with the staff member and/or principal involved first. And then that second sentence was, an effort to informally resolve the concern with the principal and staff member shall be made, but you wanted to strike that.
That's right.
It, just because it adds redundant value.
Was reviewing, it felt duplicative, right? So an informal resolution is encouraged. The complainant shall meet with the staff member and/or principal first in an effort to resolve the concern, and then eliminate the rest of the sentence.
I think the only thing that I would want to avoid, as it was previously written, was that our desire is that people are working with their children's teachers as a priority. And so the and/or gives that option to
escalate,
leapfrog. And also, whereas the principal's not in the classroom and doesn't necessarily have firsthand knowledge of the resource.
Versus library. Yeah,
Right.
that's fair.
Just something to consider. There might be a better way to write that. I agree with you that it's somewhat redundant, but I think that sentence about, for me, meet with the staff member involved first, that would apply to the teacher, that would apply to the media specialist, that would, I think it would apply in a special ed situation, so that to me would make sense.
So could I mention something too that I did not at the end of the decision-making process? These forms are transparent on our website, so that is something I need people to know. So in that on our library website, on the formal facing page where we have the library concerns spreadsheet, that is made available for public to see that in that space as well.
I was actually very pleased to see the level of detail on those reviews, and I think that also it creates a history and a baseline of what has actually been discussed and explored, and obviously, despite a large number of titles that people spent a lot of time reviewing, there were, I think, very informed decisions to keep a lot of those things where they were. I think it gets back to maybe even that non-discrimination statement, which is, I don't want to take your time, but that balance of what's specified under harmful to minors versus all the other stuff that I think is of great concern, and I think we need to make sure that it's not of concern, it's of concern to the community that we heard from tonight, right? And we need to make sure that what we're talking about here is very clear where we're trying to go with it, so back to you.
We ready to move to the handbook? Do we want to make amendments to, that was all I had.
Why don't you go ahead, and then, unless anyone else wants to follow up on your suggestions.
I just had a quick one. I don't want to, because I had a question on the handbook as well, but in paragraph 5, number 4, Ms. Landish, you had spelt out kind of what we're getting at as what is deemful, or as what is deemed harmful to minors. And I think you said something to the effect sexually explicit or obscene content. Was that? So, there I would recommend that we spell that out and say, as an example, primarily content which is sexually explicit or obscene. I think it would lend, certainly hearing from the community, what types of books we have been going after, not only here, but everywhere, and the types of materials that truly are harmful to kids in an elementary, middle school setting for sure, and as well as some cases high school. So I think I would want to add something to that effect as well there, to say after minors on number 4, primarily sexually explicit or obscene content. There could be other areas that are found down the road that are broader than that, but that is really what we've been talking about primarily. That's all I had on that.
I mean, so going with that, I mean, depending on what the board perhaps wanted to do around the non-discrimination policy, which is, Dr. Siebert, thank you, policy 2260. If the board does choose to take that out of the content and put it down in the notations, something similar could happen around statute 948.11. Again, it's not outlined in the policy, but it could be referenced because that does come from that statute. So again, it just depends on what the board would like to do on that.
Mr. Como?
I'd just like to share a thought. There's nothing saying that tonight we have to pass this policy. I know we're starting to look at amendments now. Personally, I think that this is a very important policy, and I would like to maybe, because we're going to have probably even more recommendations, and we're going to get into the handbook itself. And I mean, that's not to stop people from making motions tonight or moving forward with this. I just think we might want to take some time to reflect on whatever changes, because there's only a few changes, but it's a pretty important policy. Let's see kind of where the direction of the conversation goes. But there's nothing saying that we have to actually move forward with anything this evening. And I share that with you early on in this discussion, because I think this might go on for quite some time. Just to say that, sometimes policy takes more than one crack at it. And so I'm the kind of person, and maybe it's just my own comfort level, that I like to reflect upon things that have long-term impacts. When we start to talk about possibly First Amendment infringements and things like that, those are big decisions to make. So we'll see where this goes. But I just wanted to kind of just share those thoughts with you as we move forward. And maybe we'll figure out something tonight. I'm not trying to throw water on it either, so.
No, thank you for that. I think also we've made some changes to how we handle policies so that we could create some capacity for policies that are relevant to specific committees to come forward to those committees. When we did the policy discussion at the policy committee level, we would have multiple readings of the policy, and then we would have some final decisions about that. And I think that's reasonable, right? We don't have to run into something. I think the important part to point out, like with a lot of things, although I think it gets lost, and I will admit when I was on the other side of the table, it got lost on me too, is that this is coming as a thoughtful recommendation from administration. It's not coming as, the committee got together and said, this is what we want to do. That's the purpose for the conversation tonight. And I agree with you that this is an important conversation. And I think what we in the administration and a lot of our teachers and media specialists have experienced over the last year and a half is why it's an important thing that we have to do, because there's the policy and then there's the procedure, and I've learned professionally that when you put too much procedure into policy, it becomes very difficult to execute and govern it. So I think finding that balance in our conversation tonight will be very helpful.
It is a balance. Yes, absolutely.
All right, so Mrs. Kozlowski, would you like to move on to the supporting document, and then we can come back and see if there's any other questions about the policy itself?
Yes, I actually like the recommendations that we did on the policy itself, all coming through, up to and including adding, as Mr. Zenobia mentioned, calling out kind of what 948.11 mentions and having that referenced as well as the non-discrimination policy. And then I think the third one was just the change in the sentence structure of paragraph 4. So I am good to move on to.
So just a clarification as we start talking about edits or modifications, and I would want to be cautious about doing some of that on the fly. I know there's State Statute 948.11, parentheses 4, is what describes the harmful to minors explicit material. I would not want to cite necessarily all of that statute because the definition is not within that statute. That was not within that entire section, but I would just want to make sure that we get that technically accurate. Obviously, we could go back and make a technical correction, but I want to make sure that we have that accurate before we would amend and vote on that. And then I think it would be a question of, are we going to just reference it, or are we going to pull that definition? I don't want to pull the definition because that holds us to changes to statute.
Yes, I do like what it represents, right? So when we speak that we talk a lot about following federal and state guidelines, that is an important reason as to why we're doing what we're doing. All right, going into the handbook specific to complaints concerning library materials. When we talk about, and just get perspective, that we have done one time in 8 years, had to create a committee. When I first read through this, I thought the committee was pretty excessive. That's 9 people, recognizing that we haven't seen what this is yet, but if we're going to ask teachers, student services, coaches, building administrative, library to all come together to discuss one book, I'm trying to also be respectful of the value of time. Can you bring that down to a 3-person committee? Is there a way to shrink that a bit so that it is not as big? If this was something that, you know, we saw a lot of and that would come to mediation and had a lot of discussions, I would consider that. I'm struggling that we need that big of a committee, if at all. You know, a different solution is to, you've got a conflict that the principal and the library media specialist don't agree. If the superintendent of teaching and learning says opposite, right, at what point does, you know, the voice is spoken, we've ruled, and then we collaboratively as a group need to move on. There's a lot of extra steps in here to get to that point. I just worry that we're spending a lot of time on a process that could be extremely lengthy, time taxing, and take away from really trying to make an effective decision on yes or no. Right, so the decision makers are those that are experts in the field. And to date, most of the decisions are settled before they would even have to come to the superintendent. So just a thought.
Mr. Coleman.
Well, I went through the process in 2014, and it doesn't happen very often. I understand the want for efficiency, but since it doesn't happen very often, it's usually a pretty important decision, and it garners a lot of attention. And I think just like when we have 3-person committees on the board, we forward things to the nine of us to approve. I think we're wise to have the multiple perspectives in a larger number of people. That's just where my comfort level stands. I saw that it worked. It was pretty controversial, and I think having the opinions of, in the vote of 9 people, personally, I'm more comfortable with. But I understand the want for efficiency. I get it. So I'm not married to it, but
No, I respect that, but we're also talking about those who are the experts and the leaders of teaching and education, right? So if I take a look at certain things, right, we come up, the boss makes a decision, collaboratively, we need to move on.
If I could maybe respond somewhere in between where I think the two of you are at. When I look at the 4 possible decisions that could come of this committee conversation, 2 of them may involve, well, three of them involve keeping the material and maybe processing the material in a different way, which is not a removal of the material, which I think is reasonable for administrators or teachers or library media specialists to say, we have an adult level book that somehow ended up in a middle school library. And what do we do about that? But that's not removal of the material. That's a repositioning of the material. And it's possible that we could specifically look at this question of removal of material as kind of a unique situation where we would want to have maybe a different dialogue about that. Because I think moving things around, and this gets back to your comment, Carrie, about who has the expertise, right? Who knows the readiness of those students to have access to certain materials, moving them up from elementary or middle school to high school. We have the notification process, which I think for those parents who want it is a good resource. And then there may be certain materials that are moved but could be accessed with parent approval.
yeah, I would say my comfort level is higher with those 3 decisions as opposed to the 1 to remove. I could agree with that. I don't know if I feel comfortable with the removal, though, 3 people determining the removal.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I wasn't even thinking that at that level, the size of the group that would do it, but that might also help gain some efficiency if there's, within policy, some flexibility to move things to an appropriate level with permission, right? Which means that then, again, and I feel very strongly about when I talk about parental rights, that means parental rights that I don't agree with. Because I'm not the parent in that case. So if a parent wants their child to have access to a certain title, and it's only available at the high school, but they happen to be in 6th grade, I think that is something that we should have a process to accommodate. And so what I'm thinking is maybe some of that decision around age appropriateness could be done without moving to that level of removal, which the level of removal would really be that this is meeting that societal definition of explicit and obscene, that, anyway, just a thought.
Agreed. The policy, though, and I think that's the part of it, is that many of these decisions don't get here, right? So the library media specialist or the principal have already resolved that, this either doesn't belong at this level, age appropriate, they're moving it, right? And our records will actually show, when you take a look at the boobs, or the book records, it's, I've moved it, I've shifted it, or I have removed it. So the process we're doing is already working. That 99% of these are handled without incident. Fair point. I mean, I think though the not removal and allowing it up to the parent is critical. That's what we've said. I think the size of the committee just is excessive to me.
Sure. Mr. Zenobia.
Thank you. I think I guess maybe to Mr. Como's point, I think as a Board of Education of 9 people, it would serve the interest of ourselves and our community from time to time to have to deal with one of these books front and center so the community can see what's in them and make a determination, an appropriate determination. I don't know much about what happened in 2014, but it's my understanding that the board voted to keep that book. And so it remained, correct?
I believe that was the case.
Was that looking for Alaska?
I think that was the case, yeah.
So, you know.
That's what I recall.
Yeah.
Memory isn't always accurate.
Maybe, that seems to ring a bell for.
I'm pretty sure that.
Past discussions that I've had. But the point being, the board made a decision, 9 people made a decision. However you would judge that is your opinion. So I wouldn't want to see that removed. I think very few things will rise to that level, but I think that needs to be there. And I think the removal of these materials needs to remain an option, obviously, because, this Board of Education, like any Board of Education, is the representative of the community. And that's why we're here to make these decisions. We talk about experts at all levels, and I say this delicately, but experts at all levels have put us in a very precarious situation. And it's not just our school district, it's every school district in the nation. If people in our legislators and governorships and even in our Supreme Court had the fortitude to stand against materials that are pornographic given to elementary school kids and middle school kids, we wouldn't have to do that. If the statutes were different, if they were rewritten by legislators, we wouldn't have to be in the situation. So from coming into the board and being here for the short period of time that I have, I'm very happy with the response that we've had here from the administration to work on this issue, because it is an extremely important issue. And as far as this policy goes, I do think that maybe we should, make our amendments and send it back and work on it more as a board, because I think that's appropriate for the 9 of us to do that. But it's needed because we find ourselves in situations that these materials, I wish we were talking about books like Fahrenheit 451. We are not. We're talking about books that are horrible to be read by children. And part of our problem in some of the things that we've implemented now is to try to keep these books from coming into our schools anymore. And, people like to use the word ban. Some of these books should be banned from children, just as some other books that we don't have in our schools we wouldn't want in the hands of kids either. I'm sure I could find a whole list of titles that are not in our library that no parent would want their kid to read. So this falls on the board to put in protections so that our kids are not needlessly subjected to stuff that they don't need to see at the age that they're at. So one other thing, as I'm going here, I may as well throw a question somewhere out there. The handbook issue. We have had that handbook for how long in the district, and that has guided this particular area for a while, correct?
So it was adopted in 1982, on my birthday, April 27th, 1982. But it's practice that they are, looking at this on a yearly basis, similar to like a student handbook in terms of procedures and things like that.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Como?
Yeah, when I first saw this, it's like, my first thought was, well, we've been doing the same thing for a long time. Not that we shouldn't review it, but the few times that we've had to implement it, it seems to work. So my first question was, and I know in the introduction you had mentioned that Neola had brought forth some information here that we should be considering, and I want to understand that. Neola will bring forth change to policy for various reasons. It's usually state or federal statutes. Sometimes it's just to kind of clean up some language that has been sort of old. Sometimes things change, such as, guardian is more inclusive than parents. It's for a variety of reasons. And I just wanted to have a better understanding of why Neola said we should be looking at this.
So I'll just read the statement and then we'll refer to our policy king here. But the statement that came from Neola was that this policy provides options for the procedures, including the option for the board to delegate the responsibility to the district administrator to develop procedures through guidelines, or for the board to implement procedures itself. So that was one of two.
And we do that in many policies. Almost all of them.
Yeah. I don't know, do you want to add anything?
Just more generally, I mean, Neola will, they provide policy templates that boards can approve to, I think it's about 1,600 school districts around the country. And so what they do is they have experiences in each of those states, each of those school districts, and if there's an area that they see that is lacking in policy, they'll make a general recommendation to everybody to take a look at what we're offering. This was a recommended but not required policy, and it was generated off of the last 12 to 18 months of library books being questioned around the country and school districts not having policy, procedure, administrative guidelines, whatever it might be to address that. So that's what they were providing to us. It was originally listed in the library media policy, but we already had policy 9130.01, which is how the conversation started to shift in this direction.
Yeah, so 9130 was basically, before we went with Neola, was the policy that we had written as a school district and had been following. Is that correct?
The language in that policy was the long-established policy. I don't believe it was 9130.01. It had a new number, but yes, that was we took.
You know what I'm asking.
Right. We took the consideration committee policy that had been on the books in Waukesha for as long as anybody could remember, and we adopted it as that .01 policy.
2017.
In 2017, yep. So that's where it's old language, it's always been with us. We put it into policy when we adopted Neola.
Okay, so Neola saw a need essentially over the last 18 months or so, saw this as being a focused topic, and so then they did their research on the state and federal statutes, I'm assuming, that potentially could impact this, and then brought it forth for our consideration. So it's recommended by them.
Right, and your procedure, the state statute gives the school board the authority to create the procedure to review the materials. So it's in your hands how you want to do that. When this was originally developed many years ago, it was what it was, and I don't know the circumstances that led to this policy language at the time, before my time. I mean, if it was 1982, I was 4 years old. So, I have no knowledge of where it started from.
You're so young.
But I do know, again, I was here just at the tail end of the 2014 book challenge. There were 3 titles at the time that had been discussed. One of them went to the consideration committee, and that's, the last time that this has been really revised.
I appreciate how Neola brought this forth. That was important for me to understand.
Yep. They are responsive. Similarly, a few years back, there was a school district in Wisconsin that had some open meetings considerations that violated, they were having board committees. Those board committees were not publicly posted. They were not open to the public. Neola saw that case and then created policy to help school districts around the country based off of this one Wisconsin school district and the findings against it by the Supreme Court.
Sure. Well, I can understand the comments made by some people. We received emails and comments in person that people are concerned that if we remove the steps, essentially the details out of policy, then, whoever is in charge of the handbook, which essentially is the superintendent and/or a designee that would, is responsible for developing those details. We do that for all sorts of things, but I can understand where people are coming from with respect to this. Now, what makes this one maybe a little bit more complex, some people touched on First Amendment rights. I guess I would like to perhaps get another opinion maybe with our other attorneys that we've used in the past on what their thoughts are of the recommendation that Neola put forth. Some of those attorneys may seem to be a little bit more conservative, might not see it the same way. Not saying we have to get that recommendation, but it might be important for, once we work through what mods we have, we just might want to get another opinion on that.
So, I'm sorry, Mr. Como. I just wanted to tell you, we did consult with Bulow Better on this.
Okay.
In addition to Neola.
Okay, and?
During the process.
Any thoughts that you can share with us on that?
I mean, they didn't have any problems with it from their perspective. I think they were supportive of it. Anything you want? I'm trying to.
No,
there were no red flags from their perspective.
Yeah, okay. That's accurate.
And the three of us met with one of the lawyers from UL.
That's fair. That's fair. That adds a certain level of comfort for me. But I can understand those concerns. But we have, again, many situations within our district where we give the responsibility to the superintendent to develop processes and procedures that we still have the right to know and understand, and we still hear from constituents where there are issues, and at any time we can make modifications too. And there's countless things that come up during the years that you guys hear at our meetings that we pass on as concerns, and as administrators, you jump all over that and say, hey, how do we make this better? So I'll stop at that for now.
I really appreciate the dialogue. Mrs. Kozlowski, do you have more thoughts about the
My biggest thing was the
handbook?
size of the committee.
Okay.
I think the rest of the pieces and how it goes up and the options as to what to do are good. It's, just being prepared for how often this is or isn't going to be presented.
I think the case law around obscenity being this confounding piece of First Amendment rights, again, we're talking about children. And I guess I just want to reiterate that that's the part that I'm concerned about. I've been contacted by several people who I think have a concern about some sort of nefarious behavior on behalf of the board to try to remove materials that don't meet certain preferred ideology. And frankly, I would do everything that I can to make sure that that doesn't happen, because again, that comes back to parental rights and family decisions, and I want to be responsible for making those decisions on behalf of my family, just like I think every other parent should be able to make those decisions for their own family. I think and I brought this up a few other times, where the state statute basically gives the pass to public libraries from what would otherwise be a Class 1 felony if you were to provide materials that meet that obscenity standard to a child under the age of 17. And so just because we can doesn't mean that we should. And those are the things, I think, to Mr. Zenobia's point, are things that we as a board have a responsibility to entertain those concerns and to make public decisions about that. But we're not talking about, we're not talking about ideas. We're talking about certain standards that, at least that's where I'm at on this, right? I'm not really interested in talking about whether we like a book or not. There's a lot I don't like. And there's a lot that aren't in our libraries that probably should be. There's just so much, there's so many books, right? I don't know. How many books are there? Does anybody know? There's I don't know. I would love to know. Maybe all of them, all of the books are on the spreadsheet. So I think based on this conversation, I don't know, Mrs. Landish, if there are clarifications that we want to kind of give back to you, if there's things that we want to try to respin this, if anybody has other thoughts that they want to add. Mr. Cuomo?
Yeah, just, if you look at our current policy, and then you look at the portions of the handbook that were the policy was being, that portion of the policy was being removed and taken care of by the handbook, were there any substantive changes?
I think the most substantive change is that the open meetings portion would happen in the appeal process.
Okay. Yep. It seemed pretty close.
Yeah.
Can I ask the other members of the committee what your thoughts are about movement versus removal of books, and if there's any opportunity for maybe some delineation around how we handle those activities? Like, would we delegate the authority to move titles to administration, but perhaps retain the authority to remove, or if there's a recommendation to remove? I guess I would add to this that we're already kind of doing this, right? When we acquire a title, we're making a decision about where it needs to go. And so I think what's happened over the last year and a half or so is that we've found out that there's a lot of things that probably are in places that they shouldn't be, or that we wouldn't put them there if we were starting over. Mm-hmm. So that's just my thought. That is that something that adds some efficiency? Please.
So part of what we are to do is to have an administration that has a job to do, that understands their job, and in the case of purchasing books or managing the materials within the library, the board can't oversee every decision on that. We've been forced to be in that position until we can direct and get comfort that that is there, but that is not the long-term solution. I do expect that administration and those that we are putting as library media specialists are trained, are qualified, are making the correct decisions, that are protecting our children from the materials that shouldn't be accessible to that age. It's not banning, into Mr. Zenobia's point, yes, there are some books that absolutely should not be in a elementary school library or even middle school or high school. So I think the removal is probably the trigger point for many people. But when you take a look at what the process is that we have set up, in the event that it needs to come to a committee, the committee is then going to vote, and that is the defining fact. As the committee came to a conclusion, the vote was, I'm removing, I'm not removing. Right, and that is the conclusion of that. A lot of the stuff as of right now isn't coming through the committee. It's being brought up, and it's being correctly either moved or pulled based on content.
Mr. Cuomo?
Yeah, and I'm comfortable with a smaller group of people, let's say just 3, to pick a number, to make those decisions. And maybe if there's a decision for removal for the 3 people, maybe there's another step, and it's an administrative step. Because I'm okay with just having, if a parent disagrees with the decision, or whoever the complainant is, disagrees with the decision, I'm okay to have them go through the process of kicking it up to the board. I can rely on that to come back to us. Mm-hmm. So I'm comfortable with that, but I think the removal of the book, but, that decision for 3 people, that's a tough one. Or maybe we just kick it up to the board if that's it. Maybe we just add, if it is decided by the 3-person committee, or 9 or 5 or 6 or however many people we have on it, if it is a removal decision, that also gets kicked up to us.
But are you talking about a removal of something that is more controversial versus sexually explicit, right? To me, there shouldn't be a committee that's talking about a book that is so obscene, age not appropriate, that shouldn't be a, hey, let's all talk. There are certain exceptions that this book should not be anywhere near our children.
Yeah.
And then if you're
And I think there's differences of opinion out there, and that's what makes this complex.
Well,
right?
sexually explicit, if I am reading a book that is
No,
laying it out for me, our kids should not see that.
And I don't want any of that material in front of our kids too, guys. I'm not trying to create a way to keep that stuff that shouldn't be in our school district at all. But who makes a definitive decision on? There's going to be gray areas, right? So when we have those gray area conversation, who's making that decision? 3 people? I don't know. I'm struggling with that. Because I think there's times where it's very clear, but then there's going to be times where it's not very clear.
So, and if 9 is the correct number, then, 9 is the correct number. I'm not stuck in either which direction. I'm just saying based on what we've seen, policy and other things, that's open. But the format of this would, if there's disagreement from the principal and teacher or library media specialist and it needs to come to the committee then decides.
Yeah, and I'm just saying I'm more comfortable with a larger committee if there's a removal that's recommended. And then just let the appeal process
That's
happen.
fine.
Yep, so I'm kind of sticking to, I guess.
But again, I think the number is not a sticking point for me.
Okay.
Right, it was really about, that's not.
Yeah, I was thinking if we're leaning towards efficiency,
It's.
then there might need to be another, but 9, and that's there should be some really good debate going on with 9 people. So, and I'd be okay with 9 people's decision to remove it. I'd be okay with that. And I'd be okay to have the appeal process, as we mentioned, so that's still a disagreement, then pop it up to us. So I've been comfortable with where we're at. What we're doing is we're still pretty much doing what we had done, but we're just moving a section out of policy into procedure. So, and I was pretty comfortable with how we went through it in 2014.
I think Mrs. Landish wanted to respond, and then Mr. Moore has a question. Or
Would
not?
you like to go first? Because I will remember what I was going to say.
Well, no, Mr. Como said what I was going to say, so it's...
Okay. I just wanted to go back to the comment of removal, because I think that's where this came up, whether we're talking about the numbers. I will say it has been past practice, as outlined in the Library Media Handbook, that there already is a procedure for removal of materials, just in general. We talked about the guidelines in terms of worn-out materials, outdated circulation usage. It also mentions materials because of changes in circumstances no longer fit the school's purpose, shift in grade levels, and the 4th bullet point talks about the library media specialist being the one best qualified to know what library media materials are required to serve the school. I think you kind of mentioned that. Should be the one responsible for the decision of what should be discarded or removed from all library collections. So that language is currently in the Library Media Handbook. It also references then our current policy 7310, so 7310 around materials, that the district shall review materials, whether they be textbooks, library books, to determine the relevance of such materials to the present world and current programming. So there is some pass guidance around that.
Okay.
Did you have anything? Okay, Mr. Zenobia.
Thank you. One area that I think goes to trying to wrap our arms around, who should make these determinations is also how they should make them. And I believe a while back I had shared a rating system with you, Ms. Landish, about how some people are beginning to tackle the situation and rate some of these books so that people that are looking at them, be it teachers or students or parents, have something to go to. That is still in its infancy, I guess I would say, but it's beginning because this has become such an issue everywhere in the country. So I'm not sure that something like that couldn't be available to potentially look at in the future. I mean, within the handbook, it does talk about if you are to show a movie, and obviously movies have a rating system. So, reading here on page 5, it talks about G movies for elementary students, PG movies for middle school students, and up to PG-13 for high school students, which maybe this policy is out of date a little bit because that's probably not the case anymore. I think a lot of people would be more open, depending on the type of movie it was, to show something R-rated in a high school setting. I guess that says more about our culture. But anyway, the point being, if we had guidelines, not only for a board, but for a staff, librarians, to begin to look at and at least consider. Because right now, the whole point has been, really people have gone off of, to some extent, on some of these books, reviews of others, and of other librarians around the country. And so if one is recommending it, maybe they have or haven't read it, and that gets out to other districts, then it becomes accepted. Well, I can trust that person, so I'm going to adopt it. And I think, that's how some of these things have come to be in our libraries. But the point being, if there's a resource that can be implemented in the future, I think that'd be very helpful for everyone. And I know we've discussed it a little bit. It's, again, at its beginning, but that could be very helpful for anybody navigating this. A board, administration, staff. So that's, I guess, more of a suggestion than anything else. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay. So it sounds like we have some suggestions, maybe reconsider. What do you need from us, Mrs. Landish, to?
I have a good list. I can document the list of suggestions to share with Jody and then coordinate that so that she gets back to all of us.
Okay.
So is that so I think I have 3 things specifically listed in terms of making the changes. One is to that 4th paragraph, adding after is encouraged to begin with staff member or principal involved. The complainant should meet with the staff member involved first, and then you had me strike an effort to informally resolve. Just strike that sentence out.
Yeah, I think we softened it a bit more, but yeah.
The only question I have is where the board wants to direct the comment about either removing the non-discrimination statement and/or putting it down in the footnotes, as well as deemed harmful to minors, if we're going to spell out the, expletive language or sexually explicit and obscene content, or rather put the statute as listed as well? Those are the two I need clarification on.
Yeah.
Mr. Como?
I think we should get an opinion on that from Neola and/or, Bueller-Vetter on the discrimination clause. Joe had talked about how it should be easy for a person to come to a policy and read it and make sure the substance is there. I just can't give an opinion on that, I guess, personally, but.
I think that the discussion was to leave it in, maybe reference the number. My opinion on it is that we have a board policy on non-discrimination that says the exact same thing. Policy 2521, which is referenced in paragraph 4, says the exact same thing. And if I'm not mistaken, there was a third one that we were talking about that says the exact same thing. So if we're going to have a policy, I don't need to regurgitate the policy in every other policy, but I do understand from the standpoint that it may have more merit to have it listed. So I'm fine if it stays in and then just reference that or refer at the end of that sentence, Jody, to say refer to policy 2260.
Yes.
I think that's safer.
Yeah, either it's redundant, and if that's what we need, then we'll leave it in.
This may also be some feedback that we could provide to Neola. I think this is one of the challenges in policy development, is that when you repeat policy statements in numerous policies, you run the risk that they're inconsistent. So
It'd be obsolete, yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Consistent's a better word.
Right. So it would be reasonable to say something like the board does not discriminate in any of its selection and evaluation of resources per policy 2260.
There you go, yeah.
And I think that would apply to multiple policies. But again, once we go down this path, I think this is practice, it's policy practice. And I know when we made these technical corrections that there were somewhere between 16 and 20 policies that actually had this specific statement in it. So it's probably good practice, but we would want to be consistent with that.
I made that. That's great. So again, the board/school district does not discriminate in any of its selection and evaluation of resources pursuant to policy 2260. I did make that. Thank you for that.
Just so you know, Dr. Piasek, if there is a technical correction that was missed in another policy, that you just have to alert Julie Kelleher of that, and we can make that adjustment in the policy. So,
and I'm not actually aware that there was one. Okay. I just remember how many policies came through with that one technical correction on the definition.
Yeah.
And that was a kind of again, it's just a professional hazard for me coming from the healthcare space that it gets really nebulous.
Well, I think the approach you suggested actually accomplishes both things. We're more efficient, and actually, I think the reader should have a sense of understanding of what we mean by non-discrimination, right? Just quick, we don't discriminate. I think that's good. If you really want to know the details, here's the policy. So I think that's the best of both worlds.
Mm-hmm. And then I think for me, Jody, there's maybe some more. I'd like to ask you to think about this and the other committee members to think about whether we could separate the decisions, the potential decisions, in terms of where we place that decision, the responsibility for that, meaning removal versus movement.
I would say that's up to the board. I would say the recommendation put forth that we feel comfortable with. Mm-hmm. So it would be up to the board.
I mean, we've worked our way down a pretty long list of things, and I think, almost nothing was recommended for removal, but those are important decisions,
Yeah.
Mr. Como.
Yeah, I mean, I like anything, I would like to understand maybe where the cabinet is at, to bring forth a recommendation on that, have you guys talk a little bit on it. Maybe there's some brainstorming ideas in that. Obviously, we have the ability to put in there whatever we want. We'll probably be narrowing down to maybe just one thing, maybe maybe none the next time we meet. You may have some creative ways as you listen to our discussion and as you reflect on it. If you have some thoughts to bring forth, fantastic. If you don't, that's okay too. And, maybe we just have to have that couple question marks there, and we'll hash it out at the next time. But by all means, if there's some ideas that rise up from administration, there's no reason why we shouldn't consider that. And we might not have those ideas right at this moment as a collective group, board and administration. But if it comes back as a question mark, you guys fill in the blank, I'm okay with that too. I'm good.
Operationally, Mrs. Landish, is there anything from I know we'd like to have some finality, you would like to have some finality to this so we can move forward with new procedure. I think it makes sense to take another whack at it.
As we work on that, may I just ask one question?
No.
No? Okay. I'll keep it to myself then.
Depends what.
Just looking at the definition, and I'm going to 948.11, the statutory definition. And I asked this question because I believe that it will come up in the future for us as we try to implement this. Nudity in the sense of pornography, I completely understand it. But nudity is going to cross into art. Nudity is going to cross into history. Brutality is going to cross into history, depicted visually. As you study different eras of history, nudity could come up as you study certain civilizations, especially from primary source text, photographs of those areas. I'm thinking of high school, social studies, history type classes being in the area. I think we would need to perhaps look at this definition and understand what that means. The ceiling of the Sistine Chapel is art, the David is art, but they both depict nudity, and if used at its surface here, that could create challenge based off of what this policy is.
Can I just maybe respond to that? Because I appreciate that there is, there's gray here, right? And I think all of us could say, well, there's some materials that we could imagine, we know about, that maybe appear on drugstore shelves that we would never argue that those have a place in a school, right? And I think there's this question of literary value, right? The statute actually points to lacking literary, artistic, scientific, or educational value. If we're talking about materials like that are part of a course, I think that falls under our controversial topics in the classroom type policy, right? And I think we have really good guidance on that. If we're sending students out to research and identify their own materials, I think that standard would apply. And the one that I always come back to is, there's the definition of what all might be in that category: nudity, sexually explicit conduct, some other definitions, but it clarifies that predominantly appeals to the prurient, shameful, or morbid interest of children, or is patently offensive to prevailing standards in the adult community as a whole with respect to what is suitable for children. So I think that's where we as adults have a responsibility to say, is this offensive within the prevailing standards of the adult community, right? And there are materials that, and this is where I think the public conversation test is going to become very real, right? Because we're going to read those materials out loud. And so I think that's a forcing test of where do we place those things. So, and I very much value your perspective on that, Joe. I think it's inevitable, right? We're human beings. We're born nude. There's a limit to this, right? But that's not the intent. The intent is to educate and support our students and provide them whatever they need to be thriving and successful adults. But I think there's a category of things that we all would look at and be very uncomfortable, and frankly, under different circumstances, would probably be arrested if we gave them to children. So that's the stuff that I think we have a responsibility to put some boundaries on. I
understand. It's just in the
Yes.
modern times, given the differing perspectives on topics, the more clear we can be, the more helpful it will be in the implementation of it and the day-to-day utility of the policy in the district.
Yeah, I agree with you. And back to Mr. Zenobia's comment, that the PG movies of the 1980s would not be PG movies today. So we all grew up with a little different threshold. But any other thoughts, comments? Okay, all right. Thank you for the open and thoughtful conversation. I think this was great collaboration. Are there any recommendations for, are you good, Jody?
I have what I need, what was represented by the board this evening.
Okay, thank you.
Got it? All right, Dr. Siebert says we got this.
All right, we got this. Any recommendations for future meetings? All right, so we would welcome everyone to join us again tomorrow for our HR committee at 6 p.m. and our full, 6:15 p.m. and our full board meeting at 7 p.m. here in the boardroom. Our next teaching and learning committee meeting is, I believe it's Tuesday, March 7th, and we have another little marathon week with lots of committees and a board meeting. So we'll see everybody then. Thank you.